Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. Today, this one's a little different. I haven't done one quite like this before. Today we'll be doing candied lime peel. Thanks for joining us today. So next week, we're doing an episode which calls for a very special garnish, a green sweetmeat. And this time of year, it's very difficult to get candied peel because it's not Christmas time. And so today we're going to be making a green sweetmeat. We're going to be candying lime peel. I went back into the cookbooks looking at candied peel or citrus peel recipes. There were many of them. They range from very, very complicated, like Hannah Glass's recipe for candied lime peel. It takes 7 days of soaking, etc., etc. Some of the recipes are actually very simple. We'll be kind of meeting halfway in between with this recipe. Let's get started. Before we start cutting up limes, let's talk about the lime just a little bit. These, you want to pick the right lime. And I first started off with these sort of like extra large key limes to experiment with. Turns out that they have very little rind. They're just, if you take the peel off of these, there's no like pith there, which is actually what turns out to be what we're candying. Find a nice thick peeled lime. Something that looks a lot more like a lemon than one of those little tiny limes, right? So I've got a good big lime here. Cut it in half, cut it in quarters, and then we can start to get the peel off of it. You want to keep this white pith on there, so we can kind of shave this excess off a little bit if we need to. I'm going to take the peels, slice them into kind of thin slivers, and then we're going to pop them into this pipkin here, pour some water over them, and get them steeping. The directions call for switching the water out 3 times. So once these come up to boil for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, pour the water off, start it boiling again. So we're trying to achieve 2 things while we simmer these in the water. We're trying to take away the bitterness, and we're trying to make them very tender. So you can test these out with your fingernail. When they don't have that leather hard peel flavor anymore, peel texture, and they've softened up, they're ready to go. So these guys are ready to come off the fire, and we will just get those out of the pan. And now that these are nice and tender, ready to go, we can start the candying process. This one's really simple. It's a 50-50 mix between water, and I've got about 8 ounces of water here, and sugar. So let me get about 8 ounces of sugar. That should be about right. Doesn't have to be totally perfect. Let's get this on this fire and dissolve the sugar. Then we'll put in the peel. We're going to simmer these up in our sugar bath until they become transparent, and then they are basically done. We can take them off, put them on a little bed of sugar and sprinkle sugar over the top. Then they need to dry. So there is our garnish. They look great. They'll make a beautiful garnish, a look on the plate. The question is, what do they taste like? We want these to taste good too. So let's find out exactly how our lime peel turned out. Wow. They still have, you would think after boiling in water for, a long time to get rid of all that bitterness, and then boiling in the sugar, that there wouldn't be no lime flavor that came through. But these have a wonderful little lime flavor. I mean, I guess if you're kind of connect this in a modern context, sort of like a little gummy bear, but a lime flavored. Really, really good. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend, and today we're doing the quintessential Christmas dessert of the 18th century. Yeah, plum pudding. You've heard of it, and it's going to be great. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So we don't think too much about plum pudding today, except in these strange literary references. But in the 18th century, it was referenced hundreds and hundreds of times. It's a very, very popular dessert in England and in North America in our time frame. One of the most common references that we are used to is in Dickens's A Christmas Carol. And here's a section. This is Mrs. Cratchit. In a half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in a half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck in the top. Yes, plum pudding was a Christmas dessert, as well as just a standard dessert that was common, but very, very particularly for Christmas. Now, what does it mean by a plum pudding? What are the plums in a plum pudding? Well, plums aren't the plum from a plum tree, but they are raisins. Here's Johnson's dictionary from 1809. He says, a plum, it's either a fruit or dried grapes or 100,000 pounds. Well, dried grapes are what they mean by plums in a plum pudding. A plum can really just mean sort of anything sweet, and raisins were used as a sweet in the 18th century. So that's the plum in our plum pudding. So I dug through all the cookbooks, and there were many, many recipes. I picked out the one from the London Art of Cookery by Barley because it's the simplest and it's got some good instructions here. A plum pudding boiled. Cut a pound of suet into little pieces, but not too fine. A pound of currants washed clean. A pound of raisins stoned. 8 yolks of eggs and 4 whites. Half of a nutmeg grated. A teaspoonful of beaten ginger. A pound of flour. And a pint of milk. Beat the eggs first, then put them in half the milk and beat them together, and by degrees stir in the flour. Then the suet, the spice, the fruit, and as much milk as will mix it well together, very thick. It will take 5 hours boiling. We're going to take a page out of a couple of other recipes to make this one a bit more festive with a few extra ingredients. We don't want to boil our pudding for 5 hours, so we're going to make a smaller version. We're going to go with a 1/3 size. So basically 6 ounces of all the main ingredients, and then we add in the spices and whatnot. So let's start off just like the recipe did. I'm not going to do the special thing with the eggs because we only have 3 eggs in this. So rather than do something like 2 whole eggs and 1 yolk, we're just gonna put 3 eggs in there. Let's not complicate it. On a recipe like this, it's not gonna make that much difference. So 3 whole eggs. Our eggs are whisked up. I'm gonna add, it says add in half the milk. So we don't wanna go crazy with our milk. We will use that milk, this extra milk later on to bring our consistency up. If it's too thick, we can add some of that extra milk and get where we need to go. One of our additional ingredients, which you do not have to include. Again, this is very, very additional as a Christmas pudding. Many of the recipes have a little bit of brandy put in. So I'm gonna go ahead and put in a touch of brandy. So let's start adding some of these ingredients to it. I'm gonna start off with our flour. Again, I'm not gonna add it all at once because I don't want it to get all lumpy. Starting to really thicken up. Let's put our sweetmeats in. And you heard raisins and currants. And the currants in here, there are 2 kinds of currants. The currants come off of a currant bush, or again, currants are just little tiny raisins. And we're gonna be using those type. That's what's typically meant in these recipes. And I've got, this seems like a lot, doesn't it? Yep, we're gonna put them all in there. Boop. All those currants in there. Now, the raisins, and again, we've got 6 ounces of raisins along with 6 ounces of currants. That's a lot of raisins. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead and add our spices in now. Again, before it gets too thick, to mix it well. Half a teaspoon of ginger, powdered ginger. And it called for, in that recipe, a whole half of a nutmeg. Of course, this is a 1/3 recipe, so we don't need a whole half of a nutmeg in this. But I mean, could you go wrong? Let's start to fold in our suet. Suet is is one of those special things. To make a proper boiled pudding like this, you've got to have suet. And it's not something that we typically have in our supermarkets here in North America. This is not just regular muscle fat, but it's kidney fat. It's this very, very waxy fat. And it has a very high melting temperature. So what happens here is we put it in and it is mixed all throughout this mixture. And as it boils, it liquefies and creates little holes. It gives it a sort of a fluffy quality, if you can call it that. So in it goes. And it needs to be kind of in little bits. It can't be in these great big blobs. I kind of cut it so that it's very frayable and can break up into our pudding into little pieces all over. Okay, our consistency is still looking really good. It's now this is a Christmas one, and we can add some extra colorful sweetmeats to it. So I've got some candied orange peel. I'm not gonna have to put a bunch of that in there. We've got plenty of sweets in here already. There's some candied lemon peel. And if you want something very, very colorful in there, something like candied cherries. Again, they had all these sort of sweetmeats in the time period, and it would be something that went into a fancy pudding. So we've got a nice homogeneous mix here. And the consistency is pretty thick, but I'm gonna continue to add just a little bit of flour until it gets a bit more thick. And really the issue has to do with, as that boils, you don't want the individual components, especially the raisins, to all sink down to the bottom, and then it won't look right. It needs to be, the consistency needs to be over the whole piece, so we need it to be, that's why they call for a stiff mixture when it's done. This mix is perfect right now. It's very colorful and it smells great. It's gonna go in, and I can't wait to see how it's gonna look when it comes out. Now it's time to get it ready to go into the pudding cloth. So our pudding cloth is an essential piece of equipment in making this particular dish, and we have to prepare it. We have to get it ready. And so what we're going to do is take our pudding cloth. Now, when I say a pudding cloth, I mean a finely woven, fairly thin piece of cloth like muslin, not cheesecloth. That will not work. Don't use cheesecloth. We're going to take a nice piece here. This is 18 inches square. I'm gonna dunk it in my boiling water just for a second and then take it out. And now we're gonna set it out in this fairly large bowl and flour that. So we're gonna spread flour all over the interior of that. That'll help the pudding stay together and not seep through the pores of the cloth. That's why we don't wanna use cheesecloth, because the pudding will just basically dissolve right through the cheesecloth, so don't use that. And then we bring this up semi-tight and tie it off with a string. We want it to be a fairly strong string. We don't want that to break. Now this will probably grow a little bit as it boils. It'll get tight, but that will make a nice round shape, and that's what we're looking for. We don't want it so tight though that it bursts its cloth. There are people talking about that in the 18th century. Oh no, my pudding cloth burst and it ruined my pudding. We don't want that. And once that's all tied up, it's ready to go into our boiling water. Now this one won't have to take 5 hours. This one, this third size, about 2.5 hours. So it's boiling away. You want to make sure the water's boiling the whole time. Now I did a bunch of research on this particular dish because it's just so important. And I found it very, very interesting that it shows up over the entire social spectrum. This is a description from about a poorhouse in 1724 in England. It goes through the house and the people that are in it and the work that they have to do, and also their entire diet. It has the whole menu here. But at the end of this menu, it says, bread and beer were allowed to all without limitation. They have roast beef at the 3 great festivals and plum pudding at Christmas. So even in the poorhouse, the poorest of the poor here are being fed plum pudding at Christmas. So here it is on the poorest table possible, and yet in 1711 we have William Byrd III's diary, and he's in Virginia, and he writes about having plum pudding for dessert. He has puddings all the time. And this is a very, very well-to-do man. And he's having puddings, a very, very common dish, even in Virginia in the early 18th century. Now, what about other situations? Say Revolutionary War America. There's a great reading from Thomas Anbury's journal, and he talks about traveling as a prisoner of war officer in 1778, and he's staying in different kind of houses as they travel from one spot to another. And here he's talking about his host. He says, "He is engaged for some time past among his friends and relations. He would stay at home and entertain us an excellent Christmas dinner, not even forgetting the plum pudding." So here is Revolutionary War America, and there's somebody having a Christmas dinner, and there it is, plum pudding all over again. It's showing up all over these amazing places, and not just in the 18th century, but in the 19th century, like the Christmas Carol, or even before that. A Voyage to Virginia, 1649. The feast of Christmas came upon us, which we began with a very melancholy solemnity. And yet, to make some distinction of the times, the scrapings of the meal tubs were all massed together to compose a pudding, Malaga sack, sea water, with fruit and spice, all well fried in oil, were the ingredients of this regale, which raised some envy in the spectators, but allowing some privilege to the captain's mess. We met no obstruction, but did peaceably enjoy our Christmas pudding. 1649. Even aboard ship, when they had no rations left, on Christmas, they tried to put together a Christmas pudding. That's how important this particular dish is to this time of year. This one's ready to eat. Let's just see how it turned out. Now, I put a pudding sauce on top of this. Many of the recipes call for a simple pudding sauce, butter, sugar, wine, or something like this, butter, sugar, and brandy. The wine turns out great, or just plain butter and sugar. It's got so many different interesting flavors going on in this. You know, the raisins for their sweetness. But raisins bring in a lot more flavor than just sugar, which we might, use today. It's got a lot of savoriness to it also. All that suet, while you might think, yuck, that's got this weird, fat flavor to it. It doesn't. It brings in this wonderful savoriness to this, along with the sweetness. So it's a real complex kind of dessert compared to what kind of we're used to today. Just, sugar on top and nothing else. So there's a whole bunch to this, and we get to choose also as we make our pudding sauce as to just how sweet this gets. We can make it a real sugary sauce, and we can use a lot of it, or we can make it a very buttery sauce with just a little bit of sugar, and wow, it really brings out all these flavors, and we get all this sweetness, and it's very moist, very, very moist. It's really something that should come back into popularity because it is just so good and so Christmas. If you have never had a boiled pudding before, and this is not the easiest technique in the world, but it really is something you need to try out. And this is the perfect time of year for it, when we need to take a little extra time for the holidays. We need to take extra time cooking a special dish. This is one of those things. It is so quintessentially Christmas, and it is the perfect thing for you to try out this time of year. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and thanks for watching.
Candy is a huge topic. It is so popular today, but the question is, what was candy like 250 years ago? What was candy like in colonial America? Candy today is popular during the holidays. We have different kinds of candy that we use for different holidays. It's a very seasonal thing. Candy was seasonal in the 18th century as well, but not for the same kinds of reason. Possibly because of particular holidays, but more likely because of the seasonality of the ingredients that the confectioner had access to at a particular time of year. There were very seasonal times for fruits and other ingredients that would come in so that the confectioner could make his products. The roots of candy are much deeper than the 18th century. It goes back hundreds of years before that, and it really lies in two main categories. Candy comes from medicine and it comes from food preservation. They had several different ways to deliver medicines with this sugary preparation. They might make little sugar pills or lozenges, or they might put the medicine in a sweet syrup, or they had a medicine category called electuaries. And electuaries, it's based on the Greek word to lick. So it's sort of like a medicinal lollipop, except it wasn't a hard candy and it probably wasn't on a stick. Maybe like a medicinal slowpoke. So what starts out as a medicine slowly turns into recreational food. Even some of the very medicinal flavors becomes a flavor that people desire. So what starts out as medicine turns into just straight up candy. One of the great examples of that is gingerbread. So gingerbread starts off as, well, not something like we would think of as gingerbread. It's almost like let's say a sweet, sugary, very spicy little piece of asphalt, kind of very chewy and thick and gooey. That is very medicinal, say 300 or 400 years ago, and then becomes a treat. We don't use it as medicine today, certainly. Now this explains candy. This is actually in the history of drugs, written in the French, translated to English in the 18th century, and it's called Of Sugar Plums. Now remember, this is in a book about medicines. It says, there are an infinite variety of flowers, seeds, berries, kernels, plums, and the like, which are by the confectioners covered with sugar and bear the name sugar plums. And let me go down further here. It says in the shops there are caraway confects, coriander, nonpareils, which is nothing but Orion powder covered with sugar, and what is much in vogue in Paris, green anise. Besides these, we have almond confects, chocolate, coffee, barberries, pistachio nuts, etc., orange chips and flowers, orange peel, cinnamon cloves, and many other roots, barks, fruits, flowers that are too numerous to speak of. That's what you're going to see in the confectioner's shop of the 18th century. And why is it talked about here in a book about the history of drugs? Because that's where the origins of so many of these come from. Another place where the origins of candy lie is in the realm of food preservation. How do we bring fruits, nuts, and vegetables out of season and into the future when we want to eat them, say in the winter or at a time when they wouldn't be normally available? There are many different ways to preserve food, but drying is one of the main ones. We're trying to pull all the moisture out of a food item. And fruit is the perfect example of that. If we can dry the fruit, we pull the moisture out and the sugars are left, and the other parts of the fruit, the flavors and probably a lot of the nutrients are left over. That high sugar concentration keeps them from rotting. If we just leave them on the ground, we don't really get access to pulling the moisture out, they will go bad very rapidly. And if we want to, say, increase its ability to be preserved, we add sugar to it. We increase that. So high concentrations of sugar keep these things from going bad. Something like just pure honey will stay good for a very, very long time because it's got a low moisture content and a high sugar content. So a lot of what the confectioner is doing in our time period is drying things, adding sugar to things. They're doing a lot of boiling sugar, pulling the moisture out of all these items so that they can last a great deal of time. And what we end up with is lots and lots of sweets. The preservation of citrus fruit usually happens for the confectioner in the 18th century during January and February, the season when that fruit comes in fresh to the people in Europe or, say, North America. So how are we going to preserve these fruits into the entire year? What happens if we want that wonderful lemony flavor in July? So there are many different ways to preserve our citrus fruit. They preserve them whole and in slices, but one of the ways you find most often, especially used in recipes, but you could also just eat it as candy, and that is candied peel. So they would make candied lime peel, candied lemon peel, and of course, candied orange peel. We're going to be doing a few candy recipes today. We'll start off with candied citrus peel, which is a recipe that we've done on the channel before, and it is so very easy and very tasty. So here is a period recipe for candied orange peel. Soak Seville orange peel in several waters till it loses its bitterness. Then boil it in a solution of double refined sugar in water until it becomes tender and transparent. That's all the real recipe is. It is very easy. We're just going to slice these guys up, take out any of that internal part of the citrus. I mean, really, that's what we think of when we're going to eat an orange or a lime or whatever. And that part we do not want for our recipe. We just want the peel, even that bitter white inner part of the peel. Once those are separated, we're going to soak this in water. Now, some recipes from the time period say to soak it up to 5 days, sometimes even in a little bit of salt water. You don't really have to go that far with it. I would say soak it 1 or 2 days if you have the time. If you don't, you will end up with a little bitterness in your peel. Not the worst thing in the world. Once the peels are soaked, then we just put them in a solution of probably about 50% water, 50% sugar. We're going to boil those or simmer them until they become transparent. And that will take maybe an hour or so, really depends on how long you've soaked your peels before. And once they are transparent, we'll take them out and lay them on a bed of sugar and sprinkle sugar over the top of them. Then they can be stored or used right away. These candied peels look great. The colors kind of pop out. They're a colorful kind of candy, and they would be used in a lot of recipes in the time period if you're doing one of those great cakes, or maybe if you're making a pudding for Christmas time, this might be in it, but you can eat them just the way they are. So let's try one of this. Here's the lemon. Just great lemon flavor. Even though these have been soaking long enough to get the bitterness out, you would think that you would lose all the lemon flavor. It is all right there. Something you can enjoy 6 months after the lemons are no longer in the market. How about orange? Again, perfect orange flavor. The limes, they can be a little more bitter sometimes. These even turned out perfect. These are great. Today, when we think about candy, probably more than 50% of the items that we would kind of put out on the table as candy would be chocolate. Well, chocolate exists in the 18th century, but it's generally not as much of a candy, and certainly not the kind of candies, chocolate candies, that we would think about today. Chocolate comes into Europe in the late 17th century, let's say 1670 or so, and it's mostly a hot drink. It's competing with tea and coffee. And of course, you put a little sugar in there to make it, nice, because it's kind of bitter all by itself. It turns into a little bit of a candy in the 18th century, and we're gonna try our hand at a chocolate candy called chocolate puffs. While chocolate recipes are not as popular as certainly they are today, there were some chocolate recipes. In Mrs. Eel's recipe book for confectionery, she has a recipe for chocolate puffs. In fact, several different puffs recipes, and we're going to take a couple of these recipes, kind of whir them up together, and we are going to make chocolate puffs. These chocolate puffs are very interesting. They're very easy, but they do have an ingredient that is not in most people's common kitchens if you go looking for it. So we will be using an ingredient called tragacanth,
or in the time period it was called gum dragon, or sometimes in the recipes just dragon. That's all it was called. And it's a natural gum that you get from plants, definitely is imported, and it's very edible. We're gonna take this gum dragon, I've ground it up and then added water to it. So now it's this sort of gel-like material, a gum. This recipe is very simple. We're just gonna take sugar, and I'm gonna take some of our period chocolate here. We're gonna grind that up until it's a fine powder, add in enough of that gum to make a stiff paste. Once that's in a stiff paste, we'll make little balls, put that on a cookie sheet, and then put it in a cool oven, as she says, probably about 275 degrees, and let them set there about 20 or 30 minutes, and then our chocolate puffs will be done. When I was testing out this puff recipe, I did the lemon puffs. This is just lemon zest and sugar and the gum dragon. And I would have thought that it would have made a very hard little pill. And if you would just leave it dry, that's exactly what you would get. But putting it into the oven, and this got put in the oven about 275 for 20 or 30 minutes, they actually start to grow, which I don't know why they do that, but they certainly do that. And the texture is completely different. It isn't a hard pill to eat. So let's try one of these chocolate ones. And you got chocolate flavor. They've puffed up, and you get a little bit of crunch on the outside, a little kind of sugary flavor, and then a little bit of chew on the inside. Maybe if we bake them a little bit longer, they would be crisp all the way through, but not a hard, dense thing that you have to suck on, but something that crunches up in your mouth. It's really kind of a fun thing to make, and they're very, very tasty. The lemon ones are great, and these chocolate ones are great too. This next recipe is so very simple. It's got very few ingredients. The recipe is just a couple of lines. It's called barley sugar, and what it is it's hard candy. So hard candy was very popular in the time period. It is one of those medicinal candies. You can put medicine in here if you want to, but barley sugar in the 18th century has no real flavoring. It's just a hard sugar candy. Here is the recipe for barley sugar from the Court and Country Cook. This is 1702. This is a very early recipe. It's in the confectionery section. Having caused barley to be well boiled in water, strain it through a hair sieve and let this decoction be put into clarified sugar and brought to the caramel or last degree of boiling. Then remove it from the fire till the boiling settles. Pour your barley sugar upon a marble stone rubbed with the oil of olives, taking care to hinder it from running down. If the marble be wanting, a silver dish or one of some other sort of material may be used for the same purpose. So that the sugar cools and it begins to grow hard, it must be cut into pieces and rolled out what length you please in order to be kept for use. Hard candies today are made with a very small number of ingredients also. Uses regular granulated sugar. It would use corn syrup in the place of the barley, and then you would add whatever coloring or flavoring you want into your hard candy, along with a little bit of water, obviously. Now, corn syrup isn't something that was available in the 18th century. That's really a 19th century thing. So barley is used in its place. And the reason why we're using corn syrup is because it's got an inverted sugar. So it's got glucose and fructose in it instead of sucrose. The sucrose alone will crystallize improperly. So we want to make a nice solid hard candy. We add these inverted sugars and that holds off the crystallization. This barley, when we boil it, we'll have the water left over and we'll strain that out. And that water has fiber in it and some other nutrients, but it also has a 50-50 mix of glucose and fructose. So I don't know how they figured it out in the 18th century and before that, but they had exactly the right ingredients in the barley sugar. All we need is barley, water, and sugar for this recipe. I've got 2 quarts of water in the pan here, and I'm just gonna add in 10 ounces, maybe 12 ounces of pearled barley. And we're gonna bring that up to a boil and let it simmer for about a half hour. And that barley is gonna swell up and basically absorb a lot of that water.
Once that's all cooked up, we're going to strain out the barley from the barley water that's left over. Now, this barley that's been cooked here is great for something like a beef and barley soup. So save that barley and use it in another recipe. But in this particular recipe, we don't need it. So basically, we're gonna throw it out. I wanna go ahead and put our barley water through a cloth and strain as much of the solids out as possible, because if we have those in there, it's likely to burn in the pan. That's another one of the tricky parts of this particular recipe. Once that barley water is strained out, we're gonna put it back in our pan and add in as much sugar as we can get to dissolve into it. We're gonna put this on a low heat and start to dissolve that sugar into it. And when we feel like we have enough, and it doesn't have to be very, very precise here, we are just gonna put that onto a low heat and start to get it boiling. And basically, we're just gonna keep heating this until we get it up to the proper heat. All of the confectionery books in the 18th century start off with boiling sugar, and they talk about the stages of boiling sugar, and this is really important in this particular recipe. They didn't have candy thermometers to tell them exactly what temperature to stop at. They would look at the candy, they put a little stick in it or a spoon in it, and they would dip it out at various stages to see what would happen with the sugar. So it starts off and we get at about, say, 230 degrees, we get the thread stage, where it gets very, very stringy. And then we keep cooking it and we keep boiling it, and then we'll get to the softball stage and a hardball stage. And we get to a soft crack and a hard crack. And the last stage we get to is called caramel in the 18th century. And that is way up there, close to 300 degrees, at least today. This recipe, even though they say to the last boiling, we're not gonna go quite that far, because if you do, you get a very kind of burnt flavor. So we're gonna keep boiling this until we get to just the right stage. Our barley sugar has solidified, it's cooled off on our marble slab. And one of the things that they did with this is before it completely hardened, they would sort of pull it out into straws. This is kind of difficult to do, because what happens is it hardens around the outside edge, it's still soft in the middle, and it's hard to draw out into these straws. I don't know how they did it in the time period, and it's much easier to just score it like this and then wait for it to get cool. Then you can peel it off of here and it will break naturally at these little scored lines. And then we have these little hard candies. Here's our barley sugar of the 18th century. What does it taste like? That's the real question. And it's got the right color. They talk about it having this sort of amber color. While it's cooking, you can just start to smell the sugar burning a little bit, that caramelized kind of smell in the air, which is good until it gets too far and then it smells burnt. But this is just right. It's got the right kind of hard candy texture to it. It just carries along a wonderful caramel flavor, and that's it. There's no sort of flavoring to it. Today, we might add all kinds of crazy strawberry flavor or whatever, but in this one, it just carries along a caramel flavor, and they are really good. This recipe is something a little different. You won't find it in the standard candy shop today. It's in Mrs. Eel's cookbook and in multiple other ones. It's called clear cakes, and they come in lots of different flavors. We're gonna be doing a raspberry clear cake. And clear cakes are basically a super thick jelly. You can think of it as like a version of fruit leather, but in a sort of a big chunk. Something like that. So what we're gonna do is boil our berries in some water for about 15 or 20 minutes until it's released all the juices. And then we can start to really turn it into the thick version of what we're looking for. After boiling our berries, we're going to squeeze out all the juice. We don't want any of the solids in this. They're called clear cakes, so we should be able to see right through them. Once we have our juice, we will add sugar to that and get that all dissolved.
Then we're going to add in pectin. Now, the original recipe in Mrs. Eel's uses currants for the pectin. She basically boils the berries and the currants at the same time. And these aren't Zante currants. These are the currants that grow on bushes. They have a very high pectin amount to them. And the pectin is what really gels in jelly. Now, currants are really hard to get these days. I don't have access to any white currants right now, so we are going to be using the pectin that you get from apples. So you can take apples, especially green apples or crab apples, you cube them up into little pieces, you boil them in water for about 40 minutes or so, and then you strain out the apples and you keep the juice that's left over. That's got a high concentration of pectin. We'll take that pectin, and today you can just buy liquid pectin in a package and add that to what basically is raspberry jelly. And that is going to create a very, very thick jelly. In the recipe, she talks about pouring this into little molds. And then once it gels up, you turn it out of the mold and you sort of set them on glass or set them on the serving container. You can even sprinkle a little sugar on them to keep them from sticking. And those are basically a kind of a real soft candy. Our raspberry clear cakes are now out of the form, so you have to let them cool off for quite a while and gel up. That's the whole point. They're supposed to be a super thick jelly. And certainly these are that. They remind me of, you know, a gumdrop or something that we would have today, at least in their shape. And these have a nice clear color to them. You can see light through them. They're beautiful red raspberry color. And you do need to cover them with sugar so you can pick them up and handle them without them sticking to your finger because they are very sticky. They call for sort of letting them air out, and I think she just means cool off. Maybe she means to actually dry them so they become even more thick. I don't know, but let's try them out just like this. And a wonderful thick jelly flavor and texture. They're super good, very, very sugary, obviously, but a lot of fruit flavor in there. So this is just basically two fruits mixed together. We have the apple pectin, which really doesn't bring any flavor with it, but just the gel. And then the wonderful raspberry flavor, along with lots of sugar, and a very, very simple thing to make and very tasty. Candy has a fascinating history, hundreds of years old, and we can engage and experiment with it ourselves. We can make these wonderful candies. Some of them are so simple, so tasty, and we can also try out and really eat almost exactly the same things they thought were candy in the time period. We have lots of dried fruits and candied fruits available to us today, and it's so good and so historical. Summertime is here, and I wanted to do a recipe that would work for us today in the summertime, but yet comes right out of the 18th century cookbooks. And I found this wonderful summertime treat called a trifle. Now, I went and looked specifically in Amelia Simmons' little cookbook from 1797. I wanted to see what an American cook thought about a dish like this. So I went digging in, trying to find just the right recipe. I run into this trifle recipe, I read it, it's just short and sweet like so many of the recipes in this particular cookbook. I loved it. I said, how does this compare to earlier trifle recipes? So I thought, let's look back in Hannah Glass's cookbook from 30 or 40, 50 years earlier. And guess what? It's exactly the same recipe. Amelia Simmons just copied it. So we're gonna be doing this trifle recipe. Now, in one sense, this is really easy. In another sense, we're making a lot of different components to put this together. So short recipe, but we're gonna actually have to do 3 or 4 other kinds of recipes to put this together. Now, what really is a trifle, and do we still eat a trifle today? These are really good questions. And a trifle, it has a lot of different meanings, the word, but in a sense here, it just means a little and simple and kind of a flighty dish. And since it's a kind of a light
dessert. It fits that well. The trifle word has been used as this kind of dessert for at least a couple hundred years, even before this recipe was written. So 16th century, they're talking about trifles. And a trifle in this particular circumstance will be a sweet biscuit soaked in wine, then covered with custard. Then we'll have a sort of a whipped topping on top of that with a garnish of fruit. So anybody would recognize this as a wonderful little dessert. Over time, the trifle does change consistency. Sometimes it's a very simple sort of custardy dish. By the time we get to the 18th century, it has become this more complicated dish. Obviously, it is not for a poor person. Most poor people are not going to be eating trifles. This is full of expensive things like cream and sugar and eggs, but it would most likely show up in a middling household's table and obviously on the table of the rich. The recipe calls for garnishing with sweetmeats or with flowers. We're going to be using raspberries. So black raspberries, I just picked these. This is the very end of black raspberry season, so I just went out into the woods and picked these. The question is, in the 18th century, would they have access to this sort of thing even in the cities? And the answer is yes. People in the country would go ahead and pick especially wild crops like this and then bring them into the cities and sell them. So there were street vendors selling fresh fruit. There were other vendors, maybe like grocers, that would have fruit that was brought into them. It's a constant thing being brought into the cities and a great way of making money for people in rural areas. So pick these fruits and bring them in, and the seasons are always changing. So around here, mulberries were good about a month ago. And then 2 weeks ago, the black raspberries came into season. And now we're at the very end of black raspberry season, and blackberry season will start. Same thing's happening in the 18th century. And those people that are working in the summertime are doing that very thing, harvesting them and then bringing them into the city. Let's do a quick reading of this recipe. A trifle. Fill a dish with biscuit finely broken, rusk, and spiced cake. Wet with wine, then pour a good boiled custard, not too thick, over the rusk. Put a syllabub over that, garnish with jelly and flowers. You know, this recipe, of course, sounds easy, but of course we need rusks, or we need biscuit or spiced cake. Obviously we need some boiled custard, and then we're gonna have to make a syllabub. So we've got a lot of separate, smaller recipes we're gonna have to find here. None of them are very difficult at all. Now we do have the question right up front where fill the dish with biscuit finely broken, rusk, and spiced cake. I think the recipe really means any one of these three things, and they all can be very similar in the time period. Spiced cake, rusk, or biscuit. And I'm gonna use one of the rusk recipes that's in this same cookbook. We actually just flip over a page or two and we have a rusk recipe. And the rusk recipe is just very simple. We just take butter, we take sugar, we take flour after that, and we make it into basically little biscuits. Now, rusk, if we look at the recipes and we think about rusks, it's supposed to be kind of like a dried bread in some circumstances, in some definitions, but obviously from this recipe, it's just a sweet biscuit. Let's make the rusks. This recipe, again, is very simple. What's very interesting is there are as many as, 6 recipes for rusks in here, all very, very similar. We're gonna start off our recipe with butter and sugar and cream those together. The recipe makes a lot, say 5 pounds of rusks. We're gonna cut this recipe in half, so we need 1/4 pound of butter and 1/4 pound of sugar. And then we'll take 2 pounds of flour and add it to that, and again, mix this up. Now our dry ingredients are fully mixed. We can add in our milk and our emptins, as this recipe calls for it. That really is just liquid yeast. So I'm gonna add, again, about 1 cup of liquid yeast and about 1 cup of milk. And this should make a very soft dough. Once our soft dough is all mixed up, we're gonna set it aside to rest for a little bit, about an hour. But really, if you want to hurry these up, you don't have to let it rest that long. It can be very similar to the Whigs recipe in that
We don't really expect this to necessarily fluff up a whole bunch. It doesn't have to. It can, that's good, but if it doesn't fluff up a whole bunch, it will spring in the oven. They'll be a little more dense, but for a recipe like this, that might actually work out better. So after that has risen 15 minutes to approximately an hour, we're gonna pull it up into these little biscuit shapes, and we're gonna bake it in a brisk oven, I'd say 400 degrees, probably a little less than 15 minutes, depends on your oven. Then these rusks will be done. We'll pull them out of the oven and let them cool. We're gonna go ahead and work on the custard part of this recipe. I got our little saucepan here, and we're gonna about a half fill it with cream, and I'm gonna warm that up over the fire with a stick of cinnamon. Now this I'm just sort of bringing up to a warm temperature. We don't want it to boil, we just want it to get nice and warmish. And then we're gonna go ahead and sweeten it, and then we're gonna temper eggs and slowly bring those into this custard. And at a very low temperature, we're gonna keep stirring that up, whisking it up until we get it into a custard form. Again, the recipe for the trifle calls for a custard that is not too thick. Many of these boiled or baked custards turn out to be like a very stiff pudding. We don't want that. So we just want basically the nice soft custard interior. Our syllabub starts off with 3 egg whites. We're gonna put that in the bowl and start whisking it a little bit. I'm gonna toss in some lemon zest, and then we're gonna pour in some of this sweet white wine. We don't need probably a bunch of that. This is just to, give it some flavor here. And we're gonna continue to whisk this, and then we're gonna add in a portion of heavy cream. And obviously there aren't exact, we're gonna whisk this up until it starts to froth. Now this probably isn't gonna get as frothy as a regular whipped cream. So some of the recipes call for pulling off the froth and then putting that into a different dish and then whisking it some more. Again, this isn't gonna build up into a stiff peak. It is just going to give you some, nice fluffiness to the top of this dish. Let's construct our trifle. We start off very simply with some of our biscuit or our rusk, whatever we're using here. We're gonna crumble them up and then pour in a little bit of white wine. We should pick a nice sweet wine here, not something that's too dry. And then on goes the custard. We're gonna pour the custard in, and then on top of that, we're gonna put in the fluffiness of our syllabub. And you could even use one of the whipped cream recipes in the 18th century, but the syllabub is kind of what calls for in this recipe. After that, we're gonna garnish on top with whatever we've got. And in this case, we're gonna use these wonderful wild black raspberries. Our trifle is ready. The raspberries on top, of course, make it look beautiful. And the only way to really find out what's going on here is to try it out. And I need to get down to a little bit of the rusks and get a little bit of the custard and everything all at the same time, which isn't easy to do. That's the fun part of this. It's sort of multi-layered, so we get to try a bunch of different things at once. We have the sweet wine at the bottom, the custard layer, which gives you a nice thickness. The wine, of course, is a thing we don't use as much in desserts, but it does give it a really interesting and more fun, complex flavor. And of course, you can change it up a little bit with each kind of fruit that you use. Putting something like this together is complicated, but it makes a really fun process. And part of 18th century cooking is about the process, learning about each individual component and putting them together, the ingredients that you're going to be using. You get to choose. This is a real dish from 300 years ago. So we need to have fun with it and enjoy it and cook together with other people. This is such a great and wonderful recipe for that.
Hi, I'm John Townsend, and this is the final episode here at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And it has been it's been a grueling couple of days. We have had so much fun. The experiences are incredible here, a great set of people. The site is amazing, and these wonderful people to interact with. we've had so much fun. I can't wait to bring you this next episode. I really want to thank you for coming along with us on this particular set of videos, because they really tie together and they're a lot of fun. I've saved probably the yummiest for last year. We're gonna go and find out about this wonderful 18th century dessert. Come along. Hello, Deborah.
Good morning, John.
I am so excited for this final episode, this final cooking episode we're doing, and it has been such an amazingly wonderful time. We've had a lot of fun here. The hospitality has been, you've been so kind, and with these wonderful dishes and telling us all these things. So I'm truly excited. You're obviously working on something. What are we doing this morning?
Well, I thought it was fitting, since it was our last episode, to do a dessert.
Okay.
So we're doing an orange fool, which would have been a dessert for the Washingtons.
So something fancy.
Yes, sir.
I'm ready for something fancy.
Absolutely. Well, you've been so patient and generous in learning about all the different types of food that was prepared here on the state. But you are an honored guest, so we are going to treat you with the hospitality that the Washingtons would have wanted.
And an orange fool, that sounds like fun. What's going on with an orange fool? Where'd this one come from?
Okay, so this comes from Hannah Glass, The Art of Cookery. It's also, we find it in Martha Washington's, the cookbook we attribute to being Martha's own, in her own hand.
Okay.
So, taking favorite recipes from already published cookbooks and putting them into our own, just like we all do at home.
Right.
Yeah. And
everyone should.
Everyone should. Exactly. So what we've got in an orange fool are eggs, and we have heavy cream, lovely cream. We have the juice from 6 oranges, a little nutmeg, a little cinnamon, and about a 1/4 pound of sugar, which sounds like a ton, but it's really about a 1/2 cup. So it's not exorbitantly sweet. It's a lovely, lovely little custard, basically, that we're making.
Now, you're using sugar in this thing. It might sound very, very sweet, but you said oranges. What do you have in here again?
I have the juice from 6 oranges in my pipkin here.
What does a recipe say about the oranges?
Well, Hannah Glass is specific that they should be from Seville.
Okay.
Seville, Spain, and those are not sweet oranges.
Okay, so they're bitter oranges, not the same we're used to today.
That's right, that's correct, which could explain the addition of the sugar.
So maybe when we do it, we might cut back on that, depending on our palate. And of course, today we like things sweet anyway, so we might leave in the same amount anyway. Wonderful. Well, how do we begin the preparation for this?
Okay, well, we're going to start with beating 6 eggs. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and add the cream and the juice from 6 oranges. We'll put in our nutmeg, our cinnamon, our sugar, and now we can go ahead and put the beaten eggs in.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work. So then we're just going to stir this all up together.
Okay.
And get that nice and mixed in until we're really making a custard-like.
Yeah.
Yeah, once that's good and mixed up, it's ready to go on a slow fire.
We obviously have to cook this, apparently.
We do, because we got the raw eggs, and so we need to get those all cooked up nicely with the rest of the ingredients. So we're going to be putting it over the brazier here.
Okay.
And I'm going to pick the coolest spot I can find, because we want a slow fire, according to Hannah Glass.
Right.
And that's mainly because you don't want all of those eggs and cream to curdle while you're cooking it up so nice and slow. So this is the time-consuming part of this very simple dessert.
You can't rush this.
Can't.
Well, what's your estimate for the amount of time we're going to have to sit here and stir this?
About 40 to 45 minutes.
Okay, well, it's like so many of these other things. It takes a while, but I'll bet it'll be worth it.
I hope so. I hope you think so.
This is actually thickening up very nicely. It has not taken as long as we expected. So we've got it off the fire. It's starting to cool. What's next?
Okay, because it's nice and thick now. It's thickened up. We're going to go ahead and add the very specific reference that Hannah Glass puts in for how much butter, which is A small amount of butter.
A small amount of butter, okay.
So there it goes. And based on 18th century usual recipes, you know, I think it's about a tablespoon of butter. And so now we're just, because it's still naturally hot because we just took it off the fire, it's
Right.
melting
It's
the
gonna
butter
melt
into there. And then we, guess what, John? We stir until it's cool.
Well, it looks like it's going to take about an hour. Cool off.
Well,
You sure there isn't a way to speed this up a little bit?
well, absolutely. There'd be ways that you could speed it up. You can put it, sink the whole container into some cold water, or like the Washingtons had the luxury of ice. So you perhaps
Could speed
it up that way by cooling down the container a little faster.
Now that would be wasteful, I think, in the 18th
Definitely.
century.
It would be extravagant for them to use ice in that manner. But depending on how prestigious the guests were and how things were going
But they
in
had
the
time. They
kitchen.
would have had time to
Yeah.
earlier do so.
Yeah, yeah.
They could take their
absolutely.
time, let it cool off normally.
Sure, sure. But you got to keep stirring it while it's cooling.
Okay.
That's another specific
Yes.
can of glass instruction. Keep
Keep stirring. Just keep stirring. Well, it looks like it's cooled off. What do you think?
I think we're
Is it
ready to pour.
It goes into the glasses.
It does. It
I'm going to
does.
let you pour them because if I did it, it would be all over the place.
Okay, I'll take it on. Here we go. Fit for the Washingtons.
Wonderful. Does it get a little maybe nutmeg up on top?
We could certainly do that. Absolutely, John. I like the way you think.
So do these set a little bit longer, or are these ready to send up to the table now?
I think traditionally they would have set just a little bit
Okay.
in their glass to give them a little, time.
they'll
to
get some body.
Exactly,
Yeah.
give them some body, and then yes, served to the table with a degree of elegance and fineness that the Washingtons were renowned for.
Okay. Well, the orange fools look wonderful. They've set up, and it looks like they're ready for us to partake of them.
In your honor, John.
In my honor.
In your honor. This is our final tasting
Okay.
together
There we go.
out of this series.
Wonderful. Let's see what we've got here.
All right.
Yes. Nice, and actually didn't turn out too sweet at all. At least.
And it could have, as you pointed out, because I did not use Seville oranges for the juice, so it would be even perhaps a little tartar.
Yes, and maybe a little stronger of an orange flavor. This is not terribly orangey flavored.
No.
It's just a very nice custard, really, is what it.
I like it too.
Yeah. Of course, maybe a little more nutmeg in there if that was me, but it's really good. Really very good. I can imagine coming at the end of the meal, a very special evening, and out comes the orange fool.
Almost like a sherbet, the way we do
Yes.
today, to soothe the palate and calm the tummy a little bit.
Yes, after eating all these wonderful dishes that they would have had, undoubtedly just dish
Hours.
after dish. Yes, hours, long meals, and then
This
this,
would be an-
little perfect ender.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been just really the most tremendous trip. We have had such fun with all the folks here. The hospitality, the location. This time of year, it's springtime and things are just starting to pop around here. It's beautiful. And we're so excited to be able to come and connect, interact with everyone that's here and see all the different kinds of programs that are going on, the different kinds of things they do here, whether it's an historic building or it's people doing trades, people doing interpretive things with characters in first person. It's really, I mean, most sites don't have this many different kinds of things going on, and it's a large site. It's an important site historically. Truly an amazing site to come and visit. Again, I've said in the past episodes, if you're in the area, and I really mean it, if you are in the area, you've got to come and visit this site. There are other sites in the area. This is probably the premier one you have to come to first, and then you can come see these other ones. They're also tremendous sites in the area. So make sure to come out, see George Washington's Mount Vernon. He welcomes you to come to this site. And I really want to thank Deb here for all the amazing work she has done prepping all these things in the evening. There's long hours getting all these things ready. and she's done a tremendous job bringing these things to us and all the afterwork. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome, John. It has been truly our pleasure.
I want to thank you for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.
We've all heard the saying, American is apple pie. The question is, what are the real origins of apple pie? That's what we're going to be looking at today. Thanks for joining us. So where does American apple pie come from? Well, if we look back in the cookbooks and we dig back to, say, the early 19th century or, say, 1850, that's when American cookbooks really start to, you get a lot of them. 1824, Virginia housewife, you'll find an apple pie recipe that you're probably used to. If we dig back a little bit further, we get back to the first American cookbook, Amelia Simmons's American Cookery. She's got an apple tart that's we might still call an apple pie, but the origins have to come a little bit deeper than that. If we dig back a little bit deeper, another 20 or 30 years, we find some English cookery cookbooks which have apple pies, kinds that maybe we are a little bit more used to. Today we'll be looking at a particular apple pie recipe, very similar to others, out of the Universal Cookbook. This one's done by John Townsend in 1773. Let's get started. You're looking for pie apples to start off with. We've got some Golden Delicious here. That's going to work. The Jonathan apples make a nice pie apple. In the time period, you'll see a lot of references to codling apples. Again, those are a cooking apple or a baking apple. That's what we want for our apple pie, and that's what the recipe calls for. We need to pare our apples, so we would need to take the peels off with these. And we're going to save these peels. We're going to use them in just a little bit. Once we've got our apples peeled, we can quarter them and cut the cores out and then set our apples aside. And now with the peels, we want to take a little saucepan, and you can take all your peels, maybe even some of your cores, but I wouldn't do that. But take these peels a little bit with a little bit of water, and what we want to do is set this over the fire and kind of boil this down. You could even use apple cider as instead of the water. What we're doing is making a concentrated apple saucy flavor that we're going to add to the pie in a little bit. So let's just put this on a low simmer while we work on the rest of this. Now that our apples are pared and cut up, let's work on our pie plate so we can start to assemble this pie. Now this recipe is not like a standard apple pie that we would do. We would put a crust in this entire pie plate. But like so many of these English pie recipes, this one calls for puff paste, and the puff paste just goes around the lip or the outside edge of this. So obviously we're not going to have a slice of pie like we expect today. That's not how they would have necessarily served it. So I've got a little bit of puff paste here, and we're just going to put it around the outside of our dish. There's our paste, at least our lower paste. We actually are going to cover this pie up later on. Now we get to put our apple slices in, or at least the first part of our apple slices. So we put in a layer of apples. And obviously, depending on how big your pie plate is, you may only need a single layer. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a whole lot more than a single layer in this one, but we're going to get a layer of apples in the bottom. After we get our first layer in, we can add a little bit of sugar here. I would put in maybe, it depends on the sweetness of your apples, but, and of course the recipe says sweeten to taste. So I'll go with about 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit less, and then we could put a little bit more apples in here. Actually, before we put in the next layer, let's put in our spice or our added flavor, and they call for lemon zest. And so actually chopped up lemon peel. So I got what we would call lemon zest, the very outer layer of lemon. We're gonna put that in here, a nice goodly amount. And I'm gonna add a little bit of lemon juice while I'm at it. And this will give it a nice tart flavor. Before we put in our last layer, we can put in a little bit of spice here. There are not many spices called for in this other than the lemon here, but possibly a little bit of nutmeg.
or usually even cinnamon isn't talked about until we get to the 19th century. So we're gonna go with a little bit of nutmeg. Don't need very much in this. The apples are really gonna carry most of that along with the lemon juice. Let's go ahead and put in the last little bit of apple. Some recipes, especially early on, they really turn these apples into more like apple sauce. But we want them to still have some body, like an apple pie that we're used to today. And this recipe does call basically just for quartering them, not even small slices. So we want them to still be apple-like when we take them out. For some extra spice, add a blade of mace to the peels and the cider. So our peels and the cider and a little bit of mace is boiled down. And we're just going to pour a little bit of this over the top. This will give an extra sauce down in the bottom. Now the final part is to add a little bit more sugar up on top. Again, about the same amount as you put in the lower section, maybe a quarter cup. Again, depends on the sweetness of your apples. And this is ready to have the top crust put on. You'll want your crust to seal up, so you might want to add a little bit of water to the very edge. And this is all sealed up and it's ready to go in the oven, in a modern oven in your kitchen. You'll probably want to set it to 375 degrees and it'll probably cook for, let's say 35 to 45 minutes. You'll be able to tell by the top crust. If you want it to get a real nice brown color, you'll probably want to brush a little bit of egg on top to get a nice color to it. Let's get this one going. There's our pie. It looks wonderful. It's cooled off enough that we can handle it. Now, normally we might serve it just like this, but all these recipes sort of agree that we're going to do a little bit more to this pie. The first step is to cut the top of it off. I'm just gonna slice around the top of this, and we want to take the top off. Now we're not gonna discard this top, obviously. There we are. Oh, smells wonderful. Smells very nice. So here's our old pie there. Next up, what we need to do is pour in a special custard. Now, John Townsend's recipe in the Universal Cook, he does not do a very good job of explaining what's going on with this custard. And you know what? We'll do a different episode specifically on this custard, but now we're gonna take this custard and pour it in to the top of our pie. There we are. And you want it to sort of cover up the entire top of it. There's our custard. Now we're going to set this aside for just a second and let's deal with this top that we had. Now it calls for cutting the top up in triangles, little triangles. I don't know how big, it doesn't say, explain that. So we're just going to cut this up in slices and then turn those into triangles. Now we take our little triangles and we put them in here. Now it says there are a couple different directions maybe, but they're all very similar. We can either lay them around the outside edge, and we'll do a couple like that. I guess it said with the points out, just to make it look festive, because this is sort of a complicated recipe, so it probably is meant for festive occasions. And then we can put some that are vertical if we can get that to work. I guess it all depends on how thick our custard is. So we're ready to serve this up. Now obviously, since we can't slice this out in regular pie pieces, it's just gonna have to get put into a little, into individual servings. Just kind of scoop it out here. And I'll make sure to get one of those triangles of puff paste, because that's gonna be good. And there we are. We'll set this that one aside. Whew. Smells really, really good, and I can see where this custard would come in. You mean we like to eat our apple pie with ice cream? They had ice cream in the time period, but it'd be a lot easier to make a custard like this. So let's find out how it turns out. Wow, whoa, what a wonderful combination. Puff paste, custard, apple pie, all built into one. really, really tremendously good. I love this, going back just a little bit deeper and finding this English recipe for apple pie right out of the late 18th century. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm John Townsend, your host, and today we'll be taking a step back. We're going to be going back and revisiting one of our favorite recipes. It's called White Pot. Thanks for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So it's been almost 7 years to the day when we did our original White Pot episode, and it was really sort of groundbreaking at the time. One of our first baked puddings, and it was so good that, throughout the years when people have asked us, what was your favorite recipe? It's one of those ones that always floats to the top. We remember it, and in fact, we miss it. We want to go back and make it again. That's what we're going to do today. And this particular version of it, I'm coming from the Housewife's Family Companion. This is William Ellis, about 1750. Great cookbook. There's a couple of versions of White Pot in here. And of course, this recipe shows up in many, many cookbooks in the 18th century because it is just that good. So let's talk about our ingredients. This one is definitely a little different than the first one we did. This is probably a little simpler, maybe a little less expensive. We've got bread. You're going to need some white bread for our crust, or our crumb is actually what we need on the inside. We'll take off the crust. Our other main ingredient is milk. And this is, they call for something like new milk, so whole milk will work in this case. We've got eggs, that's our other major ingredient here. We also will use some fruits. So in the original one we used, I think, dates. This has got currants and raisins. Very, very typical for one of these puddings. We're going to need a little bit of sugar. And we've got butter here, and for our spicing, we'll use some nutmeg. And some of these recipes also call for allspice, for, let's say, a less expensive version. Let's start off with our eggs. We are going to use 2 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks. Now let's get this whisked up. Now that our eggs are whisked up, let's add in some milk here. Now the original recipe that we did 7 years ago used a lot of cream and butter. Instead, this one just uses milk, so it is maybe not as expensive. Okay, so there's our milk. And let's add in some sugar here. I'm using a turbinado sugar, so it's still got some molasses in it because we want a little bit of that molasses flavor. Not a lot. We wouldn't want to use molasses, but there's a goodly amount of sugar. Get that stirred in. Even at this phase, we're just going to go ahead and get some nutmeg into this. If we were using a less expensive one, we would just use allspice. Now let's set this part aside and let's work on the bread. That's really the next step. We need some nice thin slices of our bread. And while we could use a household loaf, brown bread, really we should be using a white bread in this if we've got it available. Let's go ahead and remove the crust. We just need the crumb out of this. So we can just cut our crust away. This is a great opportunity if you've got leftover bread that's stale, isn't as good as nice fresh bread. Perfect opportunity to use that. So we've got our bread cut up. I've got a nice buttered dish here that we're gonna bake this in, and we're gonna start putting this together. Now last time we did a lot of buttering of the bread. I don't think we really need to do that. We're just gonna cut straight to the chase. Start out with a layer of bread at the bottom and just kind of fill this in. Very nice. We're gonna start sprinkling in, we can kind of mix these raisins and currants up so they're kind of half and half. Oh yeah, one last ingredient, I almost forgot it. I thought this was kind of fun. This one has some lemon zest in it, so I'll put most of this lemon zest just in our liquid, and I'll just do a sprinkling here on this first layer. The rest of it goes in there. Now that we have our first layer of bread and fruit in there, let's just pour in enough of our mixture to just sort of bring it right up over the top of the bread. Looks good. And another layer of bread. We can mush it down a little bit. Just, you don't want to pack it tight, but you want to get it to soak up everything that's in there. You definitely want to keep stirring this mixture as you pour it in, or else all the sugar will fall to the bottom. We don't want that to happen. We want that to be spread evenly throughout. We've got just a little bit of bread left. We don't want to get this too high because it's going to grow in the oven. So it'll puff up. Make sure to leave a little bit of room and be mindful it might boil over a little bit in your oven, so protect your oven in that case. Okay, this is good. We've got this all sort of filled up with a little bit of room at the top. The last thing going in here is butter. We're going to go ahead and just put butter on the top of this in a couple of places. Nice couple of just big chunks of butter. There we go. That looks really good. Just like that, it's going to go into the oven, and we're going to bake this, depending on the size of your white pot, probably 30 to 45 minutes. So let's get this one in the oven. If you're using a modern oven, 350 degrees or so. We're going to go ahead and make a special pudding sauce for this one, and this is sort of pudding sauce royale. We've got some butter here, let's say 1/4 cup of butter, and then we're going to add to that sugar, 1/4 cup of sugar, and then some brandy, and about an equal amount, and then maybe just a little bit of cream in here just to thicken it up a touch, and then warm this all up over the fire. Now it isn't going to stay as a sauce, we got to keep stirring it, but that's what we're going to put over the top of this. I'm going to add a little bit of the special sauce to this one. Can't go wrong with that special sauce. And let's try this out. Now I know why I always call this the best one. If you get a chance to try it out, you will enjoy this. It's got some wonderful flavors. It's got this great texture, that cooked bread. We've got raisins. We've got some nutmeg in there. You know, we got to have that. The pudding sauce, really that's a super extra topper. You don't need that. It's excellent without it. Just wonderful flavors. You can adjust the sweetness. Tremendous. Remember, this one's from the William Hellas Housewife's Family Companion. Just a tremendous book with a lot of poor people food, the why. It's not just a cookbook. It's more of a homesteading kind of book from the English countryside, 1750. Excellent, excellent book. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm John Townsend, and today we're going to be exploring a boiled pudding. This one's called a batter pudding, and we'll be experimenting with some variations on a wonderful pudding sauce. This recipe is from Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery, Plain and Easy, probably the most popular English cookbook from the 18th century. And this one's called a batter pudding. It's an interesting pudding. Most of the boiled puddings we've done have been puddings that had suet in them. This one does not have suet in it. And there's even a variation on this where you can make it without eggs. So it's probably a fairly, let's say, an inexpensive pudding. Before we get started, let's go over the ingredients so you can try this at home. We're gonna start off with flour. Now this is one of the tricky parts in the recipe because it calls for 6 spoonfuls of flour. Well, what spoonful? You know, is a teaspoon, a tablespoon? So she's talking about a kitchen spoonful, which is the equivalent to 6 tablespoons. So in this recipe where we're cutting it in half, we need 3 spoonfuls. That turns out to be a cup and a little bit more of regular all-purpose flour. We need 1 pint of milk. We have here 2 whole eggs and 1 egg yolk. Salt, we need about, let's say, half a teaspoon of salt. We also need a half a teaspoon of ginger, and then we can add some currants. That's a typical addition to these kind of recipes. So I've got some Zante currants here that we can add in. So this one's fairly easy. Let's get these things all mixed together. I'm gonna start off with my, my eggs, and let's get them whisked up fairly smooth. One of the things about this pudding is that it should end up having a very, very smooth texture. Now let's add our milk to this. We've got our pint of milk. I'm gonna go ahead and add in our salt. We need a half a teaspoon of salt, and the same for our ginger. Now we're gonna get these, all this ginger nice and mixed in. Now comes the challenge of the flour. If we just plop this all in really quick, it can be difficult. It's gonna lump up. In fact, you kind of hear in some of the directions for different batter puddings, the difficulty of getting everything in there nice and smooth. I'm gonna add a little bit at a time. Hopefully you've got it nice and smooth. There are some directions where if it's not smooth enough, if you've got lumps in it, you can put it through a sieve and press the extra through to get it a little bit smoother. This one, it's a little lumpy, but I think it's gonna be just fine. Last of all, I'm gonna add in some Zante currants, about a handful. There's no set amount that needs to be put in here, and you can leave them out all together. It depends on how rich your pudding is. So if you've got a lot of currants in here or raisins, you've made a rich pudding. And if you don't have any, well, it's a bit more of a meager pudding. Now I've got our pudding cloth that we're going to boil this in. You need to have a nice tightly woven cloth. On our website, we do sell our natural linen kitchen towel, which is perfect for this. You can use a good kitchen towel. It's got a nice fine texture. We also have an Osnaburg towel. You don't want to use something like cheesecloth though, that has too open a weave. You want to use a nice tight weave and a natural fiber. I've got my cloth. I've already put the cloth into boiling water. I made sure that it's a nice clean cloth, and we put it in boiling water. We put it in our bowl here, and now I'm going to sprinkle flour all over on the inside of our pudding bag. If we don't, the pudding will be difficult to remove. Now we can pour in our batter. And you can see why she calls this a batter pudding, because really it's about the thickness of something like pancake batter. Let's go ahead and tie this up now. Now we can tie this off. We want it to be fairly tight, but there we go. So we got it fairly tight. We're gonna tie it off with a good stout string. Now this is ready to go in our pot of boiling water. You wanna make sure the water is hot, boiling completely when you put it in, because it's gonna cool it off. And it should stay in boiling water the entire, let's say 45 minutes, possibly an hour. It's kind of hard to overcook a boiled pudding. That's the nice part about it. They're cooked at a fairly low temperature. The trick with this one, especially if you have the currants in there, is that the currants will all want to fall to the bottom of your pudding. They'll all be in one spot unless you keep rotating it, especially at the very beginning of its boil. So put it in the boiling water. After a minute or two, try to flip it over upside down and get those currants spread around. Keep it moving for the first 5 or 10 minutes. After that, you're probably safe in just letting your pudding sit there and boil the whole time, occasionally rotating it. This has been boiling probably for about an hour. Plenty of time. The original one was an hour and 15 minutes, and that was twice as big, so we definitely don't need to boil as long. Now, to get these out without them pulling it apart, you'd have to be very careful. This is a much more, let's say, fragile pudding. You can dunk these in cold water to help separate the bag from it. We're gonna gently pull the top part away. That's the hardest part because of all the folds. And there we go. That one turned out pretty well. Now we have to work on the pudding sauces. I've invited Kevin to help with the taste testing because obviously you see we've got a lot of sauces to try out. Now,
you brought this in the other day into the office.
Right,
and,
this kind of pudding, yeah.
And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, but I found myself going back for seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, dang, that's good.
Yeah, in fact, and before we get to the sauces, let's taste a little bit of this without actually having sauced it up. This pudding has a texture that is just smooth.
Almost custardy.
Right, almost custardy. All boiled puddings. It seems like every boiled pudding you run into in a cookbook, it has a sauce. It says, put a sauce on this, because boiled puddings can be plain.
And if you have a chance to try this, you'll understand why.
Right.
These sauces are
They're
amazing.
spectacular. Now, sometimes we've got a super simple sauce here, just butter. And many times they say, butter is the sauce for this. That's all you need, melted butter. Or more often than not, on all these, the major one is butter, sugar, and sack, or butter and sugar and wine. And basically they need a 1/3 of each one of those.
A great variation of that is butter, sugar, and brandy.
When you don't want to have too much sweetness, they'll actually balance it with a verjuice or a vinegar.
I'm eager to try that.
Right, that one is going to be interesting. And what's that one over there?
This is maple syrup and butter.
Maple syrup and butter.
Yeah.
An American variation. Real typical variation on this. Whoa. Wonderful. Without any kind of sauce, they can seem kind of dry. But with the butter, it's got a wonderful salty note in there, and it keeps them nice and moist.
Let's try the sherry.
Okay. And of course, it is superb. Superb.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, the brandy and the sugar add this wonderful flavor to it. This is the vinegar one.
The vinegar. That's really interesting.
I'm not sure what to think about that. It doesn't have a, I'm not a big vinegar fan, but it's not distasteful at all. Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. It's kind of sweet and sour and
no. Maple syrup and butter.
And butter.
Yes. It does. It like turns it into a giant thick pancake.
Okay, so this is the brandy, butter, and sugar. Excuse me. How is it, John? I'm just gonna drink. I'm gonna eat the sauce. Yeah, But any one of these, even the butter by itself, was fantastic.
Yeah. Each one brings their own thing, and you could have your own special secret pudding sauce that you make with the secret ingredients. Here's an idea for the comment section. You guys can give us your ideas for what you would do with a pudding sauce. The pudding is so simple: flour, egg, milk, a little bit of salt, a little bit of ginger and Zante currants if you want them. And if you've got a great pudding sauce, you don't even need the Zante currants, and it boils up pretty fast too.
Yeah.
And the texture is really interesting, really new, kind of fun. Boiled things, you gotta try it.
Yeah.
This is too easy. It's too much fun. And these puddings or these sauces. You put them in a little saucepan, you heat them up, mix them, and you're done.
Yeah.
They're
amazing.
so much fun. So really, this one's a great one to try. It's a lot of fun. They're very tasty, perfect for a historical context or even in a modern kitchen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Thank you, Kevin, for coming in and trying these
thank
out.
you.
And for the suggestions. I want to thank everyone out there. Wonderful comments and great questions. Thank you so much for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.
What do you think about when I say the word dessert? You're probably thinking about a hot fudge sundae, or maybe cheesecake, or maybe something simple like Jell-O with a whipped topping. Dessert is a sweet treat that ends the meal on a high note. So what about 250 years ago? What about 18th century America and say Great Britain? Did they even have dessert, especially for the working man? That's a really good question, and it's fun to dig in on this. The answer is they did want something sweet to end the meal with, but they didn't have the same kind of super sugary concept of a dessert that we do. They had a wonderful, hearty, and sometimes sweet treat to end their meal. To get a really good idea about this hard working man's meal, William Ellis gives us a very, very good idea. So if we look in just regular 18th century cookbooks, they don't tell us about how they're using these dishes and kind of what level of society that they're for. But William Ellis, he's talking about the small farmer in England in 1750. And these small farmers, even if they were not very rich at all, they would still have itinerant workers come in at harvest time. When harvest happens, you have to have a lot of people on hand to take care of those crops. It isn't like today where you have all this machinery to do the work. So these small farmers had to figure out how to pay these itinerant workers, and part of that was room and board. They could stay at the farm and they were fed by the farmer. So in William Ellis's book, he goes into great detail about these workers and how to feed them as inexpensively as possible. But these workers, even though they were fairly itinerant, pretty low on the economic level, they expected something like dessert in their meal. He says they expect their meal to end with a pudding. Now, when they're saying the word pudding, they might mean a very specific kind of food, but they probably in some sense are almost talking about a class. They almost mean dessert. You don't see the word dessert very often in the 18th century, but you do see that word pudding, and they mean sort of the part of the meal that ends on a kind of a sweet note. Sometimes we have to understand these words and how they're used in different places, sort of like the word soda and pop. They're used in different regions in America to mean basically the same thing. That's what's going on here with this term pudding. Sometimes it's real specific, sometimes it's very generic. Here's a little quote out of William Ellis's book. He says, "Pudding is so natural to our harvestmen that without it, they think they cannot make an agreeable meal." Today we'll be making 4 classic desserts for these workmen, and these desserts all have something in common. They all have a twist to make them good for the workmen, and most of that has to do with their inexpensive ingredients or with the way in which you can eat them. And the classic sweetener in all these isn't sugar that we would expect. We use so much sugar today. They didn't hardly use any sugar, especially for these workmen. They would use things like apples and raisins for the sweetener. And this first classic recipe is a boiled pudding. And pudding per se, just like they would have, we've made many of them in the past. So I'm gonna mix my flour here with suet. Probably about 50-50, maybe a little less suet than that. And we're gonna mix that with a little bit of either water or milk so that it turns into a nice firm paste. Our boiled pudding will be made in a little different way. We're not going to be making this, softball sized boiled pudding. We don't want it to take that long. And there is a version where we make small ones, about the size of a golf ball. We'll also mix in some of our raisins. Now, we're not going to use a lot, and because this is a small version, I'm going to use currants instead, which are basically tiny raisins. And these will get rolled up into a nice little ball and then dunked into or put into boiling water. These will boil about 15 or 20 minutes, and then they should come out and they will be done. The nice part is they can go right on the plate as a full-size pudding instead of having to be sliced up. Our second recipe is something like a simplified apple pie or apple turnover. And we're gonna make this as the apple turnover specifically
because that is the working man's meal. So sometimes, say in the past, we've had little meat pies, and those were a working man's meal. They could take the meat pie with them and eat the meat out of it and then just throw the shell away. Well, the apple pasties work in the same way, and here's what William Ellis says. It suits the hand or the pocket better than a round pie, and therefore they're commonly made in farmers' families. For one or a piece of one being carried in the plowman or the plowboy's pocket sustains the hunger till they come home to dinner, and oftentimes pleases them beyond some sort of more costly edibles. So these little hand pies could be something that's brought out to the field for the workers. So it's a perfect kind of meal for that. Our apple pasties are going to be so incredibly simple. I already have some pie crust that I made earlier, and we're gonna roll this out a little thick, not super thin, and we're gonna cut them in shapes, about 4 or 5 inches around. I've got some apples. Now, we could make an incredibly complicated apple interior for these, but a lot of the apple pie recipes here in William Ellis are very simple. At times, you just take the apples, you core them, you don't peel them or anything, you core them, put them in a pie crust, and you're done. That is it. And we're gonna make this a little bit more complicated in that we're going to pre-bake or parboil, as he talks about, so that we don't have to bake them as long, so the apples kind of break down a little bit. Put a little drop of butter in there with the apples. Take just a little bit of milk or maybe egg white along the edge, seal those up with as little air in them as you can get, and then we'll put them in the oven for, again, 10, 20, 30 minutes. In the 18th century, some of these things that we would classify as a dessert end up being an entire meal. And a perfect example of this is the Primitive Cookery Cookbook, where in the back of the cookbook, he describes entire meals for poor people, essentially. And he'll say something like, an apple pie makes a good meal, or a little bit of bread and cheese and some beer make a good meal, and white pot, which we would consider definitely a dessert. That'll make a good meal. Sort of like today if we said, ice cream, that'll make you a good lunch. We're also going to be making a simple fritter, a simple apple fritter. We're not going to boil it in a lot of oil, but almost pan fry it. So might also be classed as a fraise. So sometimes they made a little sort of almost like pancakes with fruit in the middle of them. Again, a classic kind of way to end the meal. Very inexpensive, just flour and a little bit of fruit, and that's about it. We're going to mix up some eggs, yolks and the whites, a little bit of milk, and we're going to make a batter. We'll put some spices in there, a little bit of ginger, one of the most inexpensive spices in the time period. We're going to have some minced up apple. That's really the sweetness here. Basically, we're deep pan frying these. We're just going to get a frying pan and put some lard in here, and that should give us something that's a little different than these other dishes. And the last one we want to do is a pudding, as it were, that's more classically North American. Now, if all the recipes that we've done so far, or talked about so far, have wheat flour in them. And wheat flour can be expensive depending on where you're at and if there's a problem with the wheat crop. And even in England, there were times when if wheat was expensive, they would substitute other kinds of flour. So they might use barley flour or oat flour or even rye flour, which would make a very good dessert. But in North America, the classic grain that we substitute is corn. And corn was used so often instead of wheat. Even though we might grow wheat, we would export it where it was much more expensive overseas, and we would use corn instead. So can we make a corn pudding? Well, the classic corn pudding was called Indian pudding, or we might just call it a corn pudding. They called it Indian pudding because it used Indian corn in it. And it's made in kind of a real similar way as a standard boiled pudding, and at times they would even boil an Indian pudding. We are just going to bake it in a pan. Now this is a special corn meal. It's made from bloody butcher corn, and a special thanks to Barnes Farms and Milling Company. He supplied me with a little bit of this to try out for this recipe, so this will be fun. This one is simple. We're gonna mix this with a little bit of milk, so about 50-50 with milk. We boil this until it starts to thicken up a little bit. Basically, make a hasty pudding. Then we add to that an egg and a little bit of sweetener. And the sweetener that's a classic for especially backcountry and in North America is maple syrup or maple sugar. We put this into a well-buttered dish, and it goes into the oven and bakes at 350 degrees. If it was a bigger dish, and most of the time in our recipe books it calls for baking at 2 hours, this one will only need to bake about an hour. So what's this working day like for these hardworking harvest men that William Ellis talks about? He goes into great detail about feeding these harvest men, and he says the men generally eat 5 times a day. At the first setting out, they eat a little bread and cheese or apple pie with a draught of small beer. At 8 o'clock, some send for breakfast, boiled milk crumbled with bread. Others, milk porridge with bread. At dinner time, which is our lunch, it should always be at 1 o'clock, and the victuals to be sent into the field. Broad beans and bacon, or pork one day and beef with carrots or turnips with plum pudding. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon is what we call cheesing time. That is to say, a time when the men sit on the ground for a half an hour to eat bread and cheese with an apple pasty and drink some strong beer. At 8 o'clock, they come home for supper out of the field, and what's their supper? It's a new milk crumbed with bread, or a posset crumbed with bread, or fat bacon or pickled pork boiled hot with broad beans. Now, some of these farmers, they didn't want a big full meal for these workmen right there at that supper meal. They said that it would make the men sick. So they had these very light meals for supper time, probably to help them digest all their food so they'd be able to get up early in the morning and start the next day's work. Here we are, the working man's dessert, and we have 4 different kinds to try out. We've got a little boiled pudding here. You can see the plums in there. And the weird thing about boiled puddings is they're like boiled dough. In fact, the sailors have a dish that they call plum duff, and duff is short for dough. They would have this same kind of thing for dessert, maybe once a week. That's it. That's all that the sailors would get. But they would have their plum duff, which is plum dough, just like this. Here we have our apple hand pie, or pasty. I tried it with the apples a couple different ways just to see what would happen. They all turned out equally nice and soft. A little bit of butter in there, a nice, easy, simple crust. We've done a crust on the channel so many times. One of those things, don't go out and buy a crust. Make a crust, it's not that hard. And let's try this out. Ooh. So good. Not a drop of sugar, and nice and sweet. A perfect workman's dessert. He's not going to complain about that. I'm not going to complain about that. I haven't done any of the fritters like this in a long time, so I'm interested to see exactly how this one turned out. I kind of experimented a little bit with the way the batter went on, but they look good, don't they? Turned out very good. I might add a little bit of seasoning into this one. I think it had a little ginger in it. Probably needs a little more, maybe a little salt added into that. This one I'm excited because of the grain, and the recipe is from American Cookery for the Indian pudding. So let's try this one out. That's a lot of pudding. So very good. Again, hardly any sweetener in this. It just had a little bit of maple syrup added into it, and tremendous. Now, some of these, they might have added a sauce, might have added say like a half butter and sugar sauce to go on top of those. But this is for the workman's dessert, so it's a little bit on the inexpensive side. Again, a special thanks to the Barnes Farms and Milling Company for the Bloody Butcher cornmeal. It turned out great in this particular recipe.
And as these recipes go, all 4 of them are very good desserts. I can see them on the platter of any workman in the 18th century, and these workmen being very satisfied. If they're a great dessert in the 18th century, they certainly are one in the 21st.
So the recipes we're doing today are probably actually more closely related to medicine, probably medicines of the 16th and 17th century, than they are to the idea of candy, but they turn into candy as time goes on. These are probably the very simplest of the candies. They hardly take any cooking at all. They're so simple to do and they're fun to do. You can do them with kids. It's great, and play around with the flavors. So let me read to you this first one. We'll be doing 2 different kinds. This particular recipe is from Eliza Smith's cookbook called The Complete Housewife. I think this is about 1734 or so. And you can tell it's actually related to a 17th century recipe. This one says to make pastilles, take double refined sugar, beaten and sifted as fine as flour, perfume it with musk and ambergris. That's the 17th century part. Then have ready steeped some gum arabic in orange flower water, and with that make sugar into a stiff paste. Drop into some of it 2 or 3 or 4 drops of oil of mint, oil of cloves, oil of cinnamon, or what oil you like. And then it says let some only have the perfume. So they're talking about the ambergris there. Then roll them into your hand like little pellets and squeeze them flat with a seal, then dry them in the sun. Actually, very, very simple if we kind of understand some of these. Have you ever heard of ambergris before, Ivy?
No.
So ambergris, you might be familiar with ambergris, which is sort of what happens when a whale gets an upset stomach, and they get rid of, they throw up ambergris, and it ends up floating on the ocean, and sometimes it'll actually wash up on the shore. It's whale vomit or something like that. And they actually used it in the 18th century. They still use it for perfumes, things like that. And this one also mentions the idea of musk. Again, a perfume ingredient. Now these are 17th and 16th century things. They were really big into that idea of musks and ambergris, and even this, it says orange flower water. All those are perfume type ingredients. Today, we don't expect to have perfumey kind of smells come off of our food. In fact, that kind of makes us think of something like soap when we smell them. So we're actually gonna, well, number one, we're not gonna get ambergris. This stuff costs something like $10,000 a pound. So I doubt you're gonna get any ambergris. Musk isn't so maybe easy to come by. You can get orange flower water. And I don't think I've got any with me today. We're not gonna use those components because we want just a flavor of these. We want a simple one. All we really need here is a little bit of water and some of these oils, flavorful oils, and then some sugar, and we can turn this into these little pills or little seals. What kind of flavor do you think would be most interesting, Ivy?
I thought that the mint sounded very interesting.
Okay, so a mint, that one's easy. I don't know, I like this one. It says, or what oil you like. What do you think?
Oil of nutmeg.
Yeah, oil of nutmeg. Guess what? I've got another recipe book that does have a recipe for making oil of nutmeg if we really wanted to try that maybe sometime in the future. All we need for this recipe is sugar, water, and our flavor oil. We're gonna start out by adding just a little bit. We need very little, unless you wanna make a giant batch of water here. And so just about, I don't know, a teaspoon of water. Now this oil here, this flavored oil, it's just standard extract. This is mint extract here. We only need 2 or 3 drops of this oil. So make sure not to put in too much or you'll have way too much flavor. Now we're gonna start adding some sugar into it. And you'll be amazed how much sugar this takes. This sugar is actually just granulated sugar that's been powdered a little bit. It's not powdered sugar. We could use powdered sugar. It just takes a little bit longer. Go ahead and dump a whole bunch more in there. Yeah, there we go. Oh, keep going, keep going. Okay, there we go. And it'll start to turn into a paste. Okay, so I think we're almost there. Really, we want almost, it seems like, too much sugar and not enough water. When we got a very crumbly mixture. We can see that. It's kind of very crumbly. Now what we can do is take this and kind of knead it. So go ahead and grab a little bit of that. We want to kind of knead it together until it turns into a paste. One of the ingredients that we kind of got rid of that might help us with that is gum arabic. Gum arabic can be a little difficult to find. You can order it online. I have tried some with gum arabic, and it does help make a really hard pill. But we can just do this with sugar also. That's why I sort of took out some of the ingredients. And you'll see in our next recipe that we do after this one that one doesn't actually call for any of those kind of ingredients. We could also use as a substitute for that gum arabic a little bit of corn starch, and that also helps stick together. But you can see there, we can make them into a little pill, we can make them into little flat lozenges like that. We have a lot of options. Now what we're gonna do, let me get a little tray so that we can dry these out. Now this next recipe is very related. It's from a cookbook 20 years later. This is Hannah Glass and her Complete Confectioner 1765 or so. It's called something completely different, but it's very, very related. This one's really simple. It says to make pepper cake, right? Take 1/4 ounce of whole pepper and 1/2 gill of sack. Mix and boil them together 1/4 hour, then take the pepper out and put in as much double refined sugar as will make it like a paste. Then drop it in what shape you please and on plates and let it dry. So what she's actually doing, now this is called pepper cakes. It's actually little pepper pastilles, the same kind of thing here. Now you can see she's gotten rid of the ambergris. She doesn't have the musk. She doesn't have the gum arabic. She's just relying on the sugar to basically make its own little cake. And the oil, remember that other one had like oil of nutmeg or oil of mint. She's basically making oil of pepper in this. So it turns out to be a real interesting recipe. So all we have here are 3 simple ingredients. We've got our whole peppercorns. Here we couldn't use any kind of basically alcohol in this case. Even the oils that we were looking at earlier, if you look at like mint extract, it's actually got a bunch of alcohol in it. We're gonna cook all of that out because obviously it's gonna boil or simmer for 1/4 hour. But we need to carry those flavors out. So here we can basically use anything. We could use a whiskey or a wine in the case of this one, or even something like rum. They carry their own flavors, and I found that the sack really brings a strong wine flavor in that I thought was too strong. So I'm using here a rum instead. And then we have sugar just to make it up. So now she says put these whole peppercorns in. It doesn't bring enough flavor in. You really got to crack these peppers so that it brings that pepper flavor out. So let me crack these peppers up. So I've got my cracked pepper here. We don't want it to grind it too finely because we wouldn't need to get the pepper back out. So that's going to go into our little cooking vessel. Now we've got our in this case, rum. We're going to put in, it's just 1/2 gill, so we only need a couple of ounces. And this gets cooked for 1/4 hour or so. Now, this is the fast way to do it. If you're doing most of these other oils, you'll steep them in this for several days maybe, and then you'll extract that, maybe heat it up at that point to get all those flavors out. But in this one, we're going to speed this up just like she does in the recipe and just simmer this, kind of almost boil it for 1/4 hour. So here's our mixture after 1/4 hour of simmering, just 1/2 gill, which is 1/4 cup of our alcohol. It's almost all gone and just kind of turns into a sludge when you're done. So you might have to add a little bit of water back in just to get enough liquid to do this. We only need a tiny bit, depending on how big a batch we're gonna make. But now we need to get the pepper, the hard pepper, out of here. So I'm gonna go ahead, I've got my, my strainer here and the bowl we're gonna make our final mix in. So I'm just gonna dump this in and just a little bit is gonna come out as a liquid. So basically we can just come in here and kind of smoosh it down and get some of that liquid to fall through. Again, we probably won't end up with more than, I don't know, teaspoonful. So this is our speed version basically of oil of black pepper. We just have a little bit of liquid here, so we're gonna add go ahead and add a little bit of sugar to it. Just put a little bit of handful in there. Okay, so let's see how that mixes in. Let's see how that kind of holds together here. Might need to just kind of sit there and knead that up. These can be pretty powerful. You know, depending on how much you like pepper flavor, these can be kind of powerfully flavored, so they can be rather small and still have a kick.
Whoa.
See, I told you. The next step is to put these out in the sun to dry, or if you want to kind of speed these up and you're at home, you could put them in your oven at the very, very lowest temperature, you know, even under 200 degrees if you can get your oven to turn on like that, and leave them for an hour or two. And though they should get nice and hard, especially after you take them back out and they cool off. So I'm gonna go ahead and set these out to dry, and I'll bring back in some we've already done. Well, there are our finished little candies, and there's a couple different kinds here. We've got the peppermint type that we made first off. These little guys actually have gum arabic in them, so they're a little bit harder, and you can see that some of these we flattened out with a seal. So we used a letter sealing wax seal to flatten them out, so you could put a little design on them if you want to. Some of these are the little pepper candies, and I guess we're gonna have to try these out. Which one are you gonna start off with? You're gonna start off with the pepper one?
Yeah.
Okay. Try one of those. There you go. Let's try the pepper one.
Whoa.
So the pepper ones sneak up on you. You're like, oh, this is sweet and this is sugary, and then it kind of breaks down, and you get a blast of pepper flavor.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps going. So you might want to have something to drink with, you know, some water or something to go along with your pepper flavor mints or pepper flavor candy. I think I'm going to go straight to one of these peppermint style ones, these little guys. And there's a reason why they're small. You know, you don't want giant big candies. They're all sugar anyway, right?
Those are definitely mint.
Yeah, a nice mint flavor. And I mean, obviously, depending on what flavors you might be interested in, you can make these up any particular way. So, I mean, some of these, it will work with just sugar and your flavor. You can add cornstarch, or you can use powdered sugar. That might help a little bit in getting them to form up the right way. If you really want to try gum arabic, that will make them a little bit harder. You can, you know, these ones I use the gum arabic with, they don't break nearly as easily. They still break, but not nearly as easily. And remember, these are related to pills of the 18th century, 17th century. The doctors would have made the same thing. Instead of the flavor, they would have put medicine in there. So whatever they thought might be medicine, I'm not sure if it would be good for you or not, but it was medicine nonetheless. Well, there it is. Really, really simple. It's really fun to go back, dig back into the history books, back into 18th century cookbooks, and find out what candy and those kinds of things were really like. And it's a little tricky in some of these. You know, they're not called exactly what we expect them to be called. And they have this very interesting history that the idea, whole sugary things actually comes from medicine and turns into candy and things like that in the 18th century. So both of these cookbooks are available on our website, The Complete Housewife and The Complete Confectioner. And I'll make sure to put a link down in the description section. What'd you think, Ivy? Did you have fun?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had
lots of
fun.
fun.
We had fun. We made a bunch of different flavors and different kinds, experimenting to see how this worked out. And I can't wait to try oil of nutmeg and make my own nutmeg candies. That'll be a lot of fun.
So today's recipe is a twist on a treat that you probably grew up with at home. Something that was maybe made by your grandmother or something that came out of a package from a store. This recipe is called raspberry dumplings. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So this recipe is called a raspberry dumpling in this recipe book, but I think we would recognize it by the name of a jelly roll. Now, jelly rolls, if we kind of dig around on the internet, we see that jelly rolls sort of have a history that goes back into the mid-19th century. And of course, as we know, jelly rolls, they are sort of a bread product that has, or maybe cake. And it's rolled up with jelly in the middle. It's a round little roll. We can see the swirl on the inside. They're fun, they look fun, they're very, very delicious. I've never seen one quite like it in the 18th century, but when I found this recipe, I said, aha, is this the sort of ancestor to the jelly roll? It's not the same in that it's not bready or cakey at all, that outer layer, but it's boiled pie crust. So I wanted to try this out to see if there was a real reason why they changed both sort of the technique and the kind of material they used in this wrapping. Maybe this one is actually better. The recipe comes from the experienced English housekeeper. This is Raffald's book. She started publishing this one in 1769, and it's called To Make Raspberry Dumplings. And it starts off with make a good cold paste. Roll it 1/4 inch thick, spread over it raspberry jam to your own liking. Roll it up and boil it in a cloth 1 hour at least. Take it up, cut it into 5 slices, lay one in the middle and the other 4 around it. Pour a little good melted butter in the dish. Grate fine sugar around the edge of the dish. It is proper for a corner or side for dinner. So she's going into a lot of explanation about even how it should be sort of presented, which is fun. A lot of recipes don't do that. That whole idea of where we want to have 5 slices and we want to put them, we want to arrange them nicely and pour butter in so it's in a little bath and put the sugar around. So it sounds like fun. I'm very, very concerned about the problem of the paste and boiling it. I'm worried that the water is going to get in there and wash all the jelly out. And I don't want to lose the jelly. So we got to be really careful about how we seal all that up. We'll see how that goes as we prepare. But first, we have to make a cold paste. So let's start off with our pie crust. And I'll say just right off the top, don't be scared of pie crust. Pie crust is fun to make. It might not be your first pie crust might not be perfect, but it is not hard and you will get better at it. And it is a wonderful thing to be able to make your own pie crust. It doesn't have to be perfect. And especially if you're going to experiment with any pie crusts, this recipe is probably the very best because it's going to get boiled. It's not going to get baked, so it doesn't have to be light and fluffy. She does in the cookbook say something like make a good cold paste. This isn't the hot paste, which we aren't used to that much in modern cookery because we don't use a boiled butter or a boiled oil. This is a cold paste, so we use cold butter here. So we have a ratio right now of 3:1 in volume. 3 times as much volume of flour as we have butter. So I have approximately 2 cups of flour here and about 1/2 cup of butter. And I've spread it out into, kind of chunked it up. It's cold and it's in little bits. If we could make it even smaller bits, it would be better. I did add a little bit of salt here, mix it in ahead of time. We want a little bit of salt in that. So let's put that butter in here. We're just gonna spread our flour over the top of that butter. We don't want to heat it up. We want it to stay cold. So I'm gonna come in here with my fingers and just grab it a little bit and spread it out. What we wanna do is get that butter, that cold butter, all the way into our flour without heating it up. So our idea is to keep it as cold as possible. So I just grab it a little bit and spush it and then keep going until it's all spread throughout the flour without getting it all hot.
I've got the butter, the cold butter, fully distributed in our flour, and it's looking really good. Now it's time for the water, and we need to add just enough water to bring it to the proper consistency, what you would expect from pie dough. We might do a little bit more than we normally would because, again, this pie dough has to seal, it has to be watertight. If water gets into that, it's just plain gonna mess it up. So let's make a little hole, and we're gonna add a little bit of cold water and then see where it goes. If it really starts to make up to the right consistency right away, then we're good. Maybe we need to add a little bit more water, maybe not. I think this is actually gonna work out. It's feeling pretty good. So we're gonna sprinkle our surface with a little bit of flour. Obviously, if I don't do this, this pie crust is just gonna stick right down to the surface. So make sure to flour it appropriately. Not too thick, but not too thin. We don't want it to stick. Once we've done that, we can just put our ball of our pie crust here. Again, don't handle it too much. You want it to stay cool. So we've got it rolled out. I kind of rolled it out into an oblong because we want to be able to roll it up. And I guess at this point, again, I'm not sure exactly where to go. I haven't done this one before. I think we're going to go ahead and cut this into a nice, very long rectangle, but I think I want pretty regular edges. Since we have to get them to seal, we don't want it to be ragged. Maybe that would leave an opening for the water to get in. We don't want that to happen. So there are the sides. I'm gonna get this end. There we are. We'll leave this, we'll definitely keep this extra so that if we need to sort of patch up anything, we can. Okay, there's our rectangle. I guess it's time to spoon on the raspberry jelly. So we've got our dough all cut and ready to go, rolled out the right distance. I've got the jam or jelly here put in place. And now I have to be careful about how I roll it up. Probably this is the hardest part. First I want to go ahead and I've put the jelly all out to one side. So it goes clear to the edge here, but it's well inside of an inch every place else. This is the very start we're gonna roll so we don't need to have a blank spot here, and I'm just gonna wet the edge with just plain water so that we can start to get a really good seal every place where we want it to be waterproof here. The cloth that we're gonna be boiling in will help us some, but we wanna make sure that it doesn't get inside of our dumpling. So why water? Why am I using water? Well, turns out that flour and water is exactly what old-fashioned wallpaper paste is. This water is going to react with that and turn it into a glue. You could use something like egg whites or egg yolks also, but we don't want to add a kind of an eggy flavor here. The water is going to work, hopefully, perfectly. Now we need to work on rolling this up. So we need to make sure these ends are all sealed up properly. So I'm just gonna pinch them up so all those edges get sealed properly. And I see we got a little bit of problem here on this sort of last flap as it comes over. The jelly was kind of squishing out ahead of it. So I have our extra stuff and I can create a patch. We can patch over the top of that. It might not stick perfectly, but we'll have enough water here that we can patch over that whole thing. Let me get a little water. We have to prepare our cloth for this, and normally on a boiled pudding, especially one like this one where we need to protect the contents, we put our cloth into boiling water and then we flour it. And that will help make it waterproof so that it won't let the water come in. This is our natural linen pudding cloth here, and the natural linen, when it heats up, when it gets wet, it naturally expands and gets tighter, so it'll help make it waterproof, and then that flour will sort of finish the idea. Now it's time to put this roll in the middle and figure out how to tie it up properly. I put the jelly roll at the very edge of this cloth because unlike a normal pudding where we would put it in the dead center and it was a ball and we wrap all the way around it, this one, because it's an oblong like a giant Tootsie Roll, we've got to put it at the edge of the cloth, and then we can start to roll the whole thing up. So there it is, look at that. And we just roll it up, roll it up. Boy, it's going to be waterproof. Wow. Wow, that should work really well. So now we're just going to tie off the ends, and then maybe one in the middle. Maybe we'll kind of do a spiral around the outside. I think we've got this tied up so that it'll work. It's tied up very tightly at the end so that no water can get in. And then I went ahead and went around that center section to keep it from sort of opening up and causing problems. Now it's time for it to go into boiling water. It should go in directly to boiling water, cover the entire part that needs to be boiled. If this end sticks out, it's no problem. And that water needs to stay in a rolling boil for a whole hour. It boiled for an hour. I took it out and I let it cool down. Not all the way cooled down, but most of the way cooled down. Removed that cloth. You have to remove that cloth before it gets stone cold, or you can get it apart. And if you try to move it too quickly, this will be too soft and it'll break apart. So you do have to pick just the right time. I got it out without damaging it. It was so wonderful. Didn't have hardly any leaking going on. So most of the jelly was it was all intact. Water did not infiltrate and cause damage. The great thing is what we're doing here is cooking it at 220 degrees, 212 degrees, right? So it doesn't overcook it. It tends to, leave it in this very interesting cooked texture, which we here in North America aren't probably quite as used to. So boiled puddings aren't something we normally do. But turned out perfect. I let it cool off so that all the way down to a cool room temperature so that we could cut this properly so that we could display it on the plate exactly like the recipe desired. And it's very beautiful, and it did cut out very well. I was very concerned. Do I need to use a thread? Do I need to, what do I need to do? The pie crust set up firm enough so that I was able to cut it without all of the jelly squishing out, which was what I was worried about. So the real question is, how did it turn out? What is it going to taste like? So here's our chance to try it out. It's very, very good, like you would expect pie crust and raspberry jam to be. How can you mess it up, right? Which is a good thing about a recipe like this. So simple. Almost anyone can do it, and it looks really fun, very beautiful. You can see why you would use it on the table just for its beauty alone, much less this wonderful treat. I went ahead and did the directions like they showed. Let's put some butter in there, let's put some sugar in there, so if you need just a little more sweetness, if the jam just isn't enough for you, there's a little more. And boy, I really enjoy this one. It's too bad that, I just couldn't eat the whole thing because I want to eat the whole thing.
So what I was very, very concerned about was texture. What's going to happen when we boil this pie crust dough, which is not something we normally do, and the texture actually turns out very, very fun. It's like the bottom crust of a pie. Because when we do the bottom crust of the pie, it has moisture on it all the time. If it's cooked properly, it's not gummy. It has this kind of very firm texture, but not flaky like the top of the pie. Personally, some of the best part of the pie crust for me. I really like that part. And that's what we get all through this on this one. So it's got this great consistent texture, and it's a totally different way. We just don't do anything like this.
So last year I wanted to find an apple pie recipe for the channel because it's so popular today. And I actually had difficulty. As I was digging through the 18th century cookbooks, there just aren't that many apple pie recipes that pop out. Now, I thought that was strange at the time. I did find one excellent recipe. You'll want to check that one out. So in recent research, I found a wonderful section, a giant section on apple pies in this great book. It's the Country Housewife's Family Companion, written by William Ellis in 1749, right there in the middle of the 18th century. And he is writing to farmers' housewives in central southern England. And these are not extremely well-to-do farmers, but sort of that middling sort. And he wants to help them have a very efficient household. One of the things that's happening on these farms is at harvest time, they have to hire workers, field hands that come in and work for 3 weeks, a month, maybe as long as 3 months if they were having trouble getting workers and they needed to hire them for a longer time. And they would pay these men partially in their food. And so there's a great section about victualling or feeding these harvestmen or field workers. And that's where this section of the apple pie comes in. This apple pie section in this cookbook is so big that it starts off with a huge poem. Let me read to you this, just the very first part. It says, "Of all the delicacies which Britons try to please the palate or delight the eye, of all the several kinds of sumptuous fare, there's none that can with apple pie compare." That's just a tiny, this poem goes on and on. Apple pies are really important for feeding these temporary workers. You want your temporary workers to be happy, but you want to feed them dessert the most inexpensive way possible. And so that's where he's really digging into why he's, talking about the apple pie over and over again. He explains 3 or 4 different ways you could do it. He even says you can do it this cheaply, but your workers will be unhappy. They will not work well. So it's really important to feed these workers something they're going to enjoy, but to do it in the least expensive way possible. So the titles of these little sections are great. How a farmer disgraced himself by having apple pasties made at a dear rate, and how he might have had them made much cheaper and better. So he really says, you can do it wrong or you can do it right. There are inexpensive ways to do that. And we're looking at this apple pie for the worker. And one of the reasons why I really like this recipe is because a lot of people can be intimidated by cooking today. We have cooking shows and giant cookbooks, and everything has to look perfect. Not everybody has to eat in a gourmet fashion every day. And you don't have to have a very complicated apple pie. You can have one that's so simple, and this one is it. So here's how simple this apple pie is. Let me read to you this section. How another farmer has his apple pies and pasties made something better than the last farmer. A farmer near me has his apple pasties made by first paring the apples, taking away the stalks and tops of them, but chops the apples with their cores very small, for by being so small chopped, they fill the apple crust or coffin in every part of it better than if they were quartered, and the cores thereby are less perceived in the eating. They're putting all of the apple in the apple pie. Like, some of these guys are putting the stems in and everything. It's crazy how they're filling up their apple pie with just like filler. I'm surprised they aren't sweeping stuff off the floor and putting it in their apple pie. We're not going to do that quite like that, but it's that simple. There's the crust, there's the apple that you put in that's chopped the way you want it. You can pare it, not pare it. You can take away the cores. We're going to take away the cores, obviously. We're going to throw out the leaves and the sticks. And then he talks later on about the type of apple you use. And if you use the right apple, then you don't even need to put sugar or water or anything in the apple pie. It's just the apples and the crust. That's all there is to this simple apple pie recipe. We're gonna do that same recipe with just a little twist. Our crust for this pie is going to be a very simple crust. Butter, flour, water, that's it. I mean, that's all it takes. And you know, a lot of people can be intimidated by pie crusts. Don't be intimidated by pie crust, just do it. You don't have to go to the store and buy it. They're inexpensive and simple, easy, fast to make at home even. Have a little bit of courage. Jump in there and make the simple pie crust. It doesn't have to be beautiful. We're gonna rub this butter in. It's cold butter. We don't want to get it warm or hot. So as we're rubbing it in with our fingers, we're just doing it for a second and then moving on to another piece. We're just trying to break up all these butter lumps into the smallest thing possible. Now that the butter's rubbed in, we're gonna add just a little bit of water, just enough to bring it into our short paste. Then we can put it on our floured table, roll it out. Again, I'm not gonna put the cores in there. Apparently apple seeds aren't actually good for you. So you can have some apple seeds, but the idea of having sort of ground up apple seeds and any number of them isn't good for you because it has cyanide in there. So don't put the apple seeds in there. Even if you want to follow the recipe completely, if you want the stems, that's probably all right. You can toss those in if you really want to. So one of the things that's making this cheap, especially for these farmers, is they typically had apple trees right there on their land. It was one of the great resources that they had available to them. So he even talks about having so many apples that he has to use them for other purposes. But he's definitely going to use all these apples, or as many apples as he needs to feed these harvestmen, because it is, for him, the very cheapest dessert he can make. So far we've got the crust, we've got the apples, our final ingredient. And if we use a real sweet apple, we don't even need that. But our final ingredient that he talks about is just a little bit of sugar strewn on top, and that's it. We are not even going to add any nutmeg to this. It's not even part of the recipe, so we're not going to add that. Now, finally, we're going to put the top crust on this. That's pretty simple. And I'm not gonna do anything fancy with this. I don't want to have a lot of air in it. Now that our pie is basically finished and crimped up, it's ready to go into the oven. We're gonna be baking it in our earthen oven that we just finished a few weeks ago. You'll be doing it in your home oven. So, hey, 375 degrees probably. And, well, I don't know how big your pie is. So maybe it's 25, 30 minutes. You know what? At least in an 18th century sense, we don't really use timers on these. We use our nose. When we can start to smell it even on the outside of our earthen oven, we say, wait a minute, I start to smell that apple pie. Take a peek in there and you can be able to tell by the top whether it's ready to come out, whether it's looking right. So use your nose, use your eyes, then you'll know when it's done. And there it is, the simplest apple pie ever. I can't wait to try this. It smells great right out of the oven. You can smell the crust and the butter in the crust. You can smell the apples in there. And there
it isn't the apple pie that we are used to. You know, we're thinking it's got to have all those apple pie spices. We even call them apple pie spices. Sometimes we buy it as a mix, but this doesn't have any of that in it. Well, mostly. Let's try it out. This is so good. It's so deadly simple and so extremely good. I mean, the crust is dead simple, the filling, and we didn't have to put any of that filling that we normally do in a modern apple pie. You know, lots of flour, cornstarch, or, you know, liquids, all those things that have to go into an apple pie. You don't need any of that. The apple is going to do everything you need to do. He talks about that in the recipe book. It's like, well, they'll stew in their own juices and they'll give you what you need. It doesn't come out quite as easy, although this piece came out pretty nice. And I mean, I've made modern pies that didn't come out as nicely as this one. So I'm sold. You can do an apple pie so immensely easy. And this is right out of the cookbooks. This is right out of simple farmer cooking. I can't recommend it enough.
Locust Grove, September 8th, 1825. Dear General, your letter of the 15th of the month was received by me last week. I have not heard from my mother since her arrival at Pittsburgh. Inform her that everything goes on here exceedingly well. The women have dried a great deal of fruit and are at their houses spinning wool or cotton or something of that kind. Old Nanny officiates for me in the cooking department. 2 churns are going daily. And Alfred goes to market almost every day and gives the profits to Laraway. I got some white Havana sugar and made some peach preserves, about 2 pounds, I suppose, and with all due deference to my mother's knowledge on this subject, I think they excel that of her make. I would like to send one of the jars to Anne. I shall keep a pound or so against my mother's return, and send the remainder to Serena. Request Charles and all of them to write to me directly in Louisville. If I am not here, the letter will be forwarded. I have not heard from George for a long time, but I am told Orleans is healthy. Yours truly, Dr. John Cron.
So we're here at historic Locust Grove here in Louisville, Kentucky, and what you just heard was part of a letter from John Cron, right? To his mother? Is he talking to his mother or his brother?
Yes, so John Cron was actually writing to his brother-in-law, Thomas Jessup, who was a general who lived in Washington City, or Washington, D.C., as we refer to it now, with John's brother Anne. So this letter is actually written in 1825, which is after John's father had passed away. So at that time, his mother was actually going and living with her children in places like Pittsburgh or in Washington.
So this particular letter was written in
1825.
1825.
Yes, this was written September 8th, 1825.
And we just heard a little piece of the letter, right?
It's a much longer letter. This family really kept up with each other, and it's wonderful because they tell each other all these little details about their lives and give us this window into it.
Right. So we get to find out what this estate was like in 1825 in this particular letter. Now, we've got preserves mentioned in this letter.
So I love this letter, and I absolutely love John Cron. His letters are so entertaining, but he does sort of put out this challenge and say, my preserves are better than my mother's preserves. Mm-hmm. So we're going to actually do a taste test today.
Okay.
We've got some preserves here, first of all, that come from Amelia Simmons. So this is
1796.
96. This is right when his mother had moved in here and was the lady of the house. So this is from Mom's time. Mm-hmm. Now these are made with using brandy. They're preserved in brandy.
Oh yeah, they're preserved in brandy, all right. Now this hasn't gotten real mushy yet.
No.
Probably, these are pretty fresh, right?
Yeah, we made these recently because we're about at that time. So there's certain peaches that actually you do harvest in the fall that are intended for preserving. Mm-hmm. So we've just set these in, and they would keep for 6 months to a year.
But they aren't terribly sweet.
No, that wasn't what these peaches were made for. The peaches that are sweeter that you use for pies and jams really came in the spring.
Right, and the brandy is kind of heavy in this, so there's a lot of brandy flavor. There's some
there's some definite peach flavor there, but not what we would consider
Not what we're used to.
peach preserves. Yeah, so, but we're going to be doing
We're going to compare this with a recipe from Mary Randolph from the
Right.
Virginia housewife from 1824.
which is exactly this time frame.
Exactly.
And this one's going to be a good bit different. How do we get started? Well, we'll try out this recipe after when we're done with it. How do we get started on the Mary Randolph recipe?
So Mary Randolph, we're going to start. There's no brandy in this one. We're just going to start by paring our peaches.
Okay.
So grab a knife
Okay.
and we'll start paring them,
Okay.
and then we'll slice them. All right, now once you've pared a peach, there is actually a trick to slicing this.
Right.
So what you're going to do is you've pared your peach. You're going to find the natural crease in the peach and slice around. And then first you're going to quarter it. And then I'm going to do this in eighths. So I've gone around 4 times. Once I'm done, then we come around the center. So we've actually sliced the peach on the pit, and then we twist. And
Ta-da, right there it
ta-da! All the pieces come off. Some of them you have to still pull off of the pit, but still the easiest way. Now, one thing I will say for Lucy Cron's day is that the recipe from Amelia Simmons actually has you blanch the peaches first, which does make this a little bit easier.
Right. So we've got these guys paired. What's the next step?
All right, so we're supposed to take the same weight of the peaches, and we have 2 pounds of peaches here,
Okay.
in sugar, and so 2 pounds of sugar. And we talked about this is one of the big differences between the 1796 recipe and the 1824 recipe.
So how do we do this one?
First, we're just going to put a little bit on. What I have found works the best is actually not to put all that sugar on at first. So we're going to actually just toss these peaches in the bowl, make sure that they're covered in sugar. I might add a little bit more here. She has you have these sit for 2 to 3 hours. So what I found works best is to keep coming back through that time. What's going to happen is the peaches and the sugar are going to start creating this wonderful syrup. And so we're going to just keep coming back and adding more sugar and sort of tossing it up.
Right.
And then we'll create this wonderful syrup that's going to preserve these peaches.
So while this is kind of doing its thing, right, making its own syrup, we need to come back to this over and over again.
Yeah.
While that's doing that thing,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about this letter and who's actually doing the cooking.
Right. So I said this is one of my favorite letters. I love this letter for so many reasons. It really shows us the different levels of the hierarchy here at Locust Grove. So John talks in this letter, he says, "Old Nanny officiates for me in the kitchen." Nan was an enslaved woman here at Locust Grove. He says old Nanny to his brother-in-law, so we kind of have extrapolated from that. Okay, she was probably here for a long time, probably here when the kids grew up. She might have been their nurse.
Okay.
But this is why we know the name of the woman who actually did most of the cooking and the work in this kitchen. So everything we're looking at here today is what Nan was doing.
Right.
And
right. So even though John says my preserves,
Right.
he actually means preserves made
by
here.
Nan, yeah. And I love John so much. I love his personality, but I look at this letter and I say, wow, John, in one sentence, when you say my preserves, you have challenged your mother,
Right.
and ignored the work of this woman.
Right.
But I mean, like you say, I understand. He thought he was the master of the house.
Right.
This was his.
Yeah.
But we love it because it just shows us so many of the people who were here at Locust Grove, as well as the crops they were preserving, with the food they were making. It's such a lovely slice of life.
Right. He couldn't have done better to tell us what was happening in his
yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Even if he was like, hey, 200 years later, this is what was happening.
Right.
This has been sort of percolating here for 10 or 20 minutes,
Yeah.
and it definitely is starting to pull some of that moisture out. Now we need to...
Just keep adding the sugar. You can see
Okay.
it's already got this lovely syrup forming. And we're just going to keep putting that sugar in there.
And that'll just keep pulling the moisture out. Good. So these have set for what, an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah.
They're nice and gooey. So what's the next step?
So we can definitely see by now what a 1:1 sugar to peach ratio gets you.
Yeah.
So now,
diabetes.
yes. Well, people burned a lot more calories.
Right, exactly.
At the time, we're just going to ladle them into our pan. You want to use a pot that's not too deep.
Okay.
And in fact, that's actually
Right.
probably about as much as I would do in one go right there. We can put in another batch if we want to. And then we've got what is actually almost too thick at this point. So we're going to add a little bit of water.
Okay.
Not too much.
And it calls for adding water?
It says to add a little bit of water, and then we're going to put it over the fire.
I like those
until,
precise measurements.
You know, enough.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And just put it over till, quote, thoroughly scalded.
Thoroughly scalded, whatever that might mean. I mean, I think scalded, I think just flash hot, but obviously that can't be true here. We
Well,
have to
we're-
get everything hot here.
We're
Now,
going to get it hot and then cook it down a little bit again to a syrup.
do we cook it down? Is that what it says?
It's you're absolutely right. It says to put it down until thoroughly scalded. Take them out with the ladle, draining off the syrup is the next instruction.
Because, I mean, when I think about this, I think the whole process here is really just to kill off the bugs,
That's true.
right? So we're not seemingly trying to cook the peaches as much as just getting them hot enough to make sure that it's killing everything off.
You're right.
That would be my guess.
No, you're absolutely right. But what's really happening is that we have to make sure that we cook down whatever water we've put in here again, so that we do end up with a really nice syrup for preserving these in.
Okay. Off they go, onto the fire.
And here we are over the fire. It really is eyeballing it, you know, looking at it, making sure the syrup looks good. She does say that if you don't have enough syrup, you can put it back in with more water and do it again. You can add more or less water, really until it just looks like you say you've taken off the bugs before you preserve it. You've got a good syrup, but the key is you have to make sure that you have enough syrup to cover the peaches, but it really doesn't take as much syrup as you think. They're going to
Right,
pack
so we're gonna
down
have leftover,
into
probably.
that. I've found that's not running out of syrup is not usually the problem. Now that these have been thoroughly scalded, we take them off the fire and let them cool for a moment. Then next, we're going to gently scoop the fruit into the jar. And then we're going to cover that up with some of this wonderful syrup we've created here.
And we want that syrup to come all the way up over the top, probably.
We do want that now. The peaches will try to float in the syrup, so at some point you do
Gonna have
need
to give up on it.
to sort of, well, and you can push
Yeah,
a
there they
couple in
go.
there, and yeah, there they go.
Okay, so we got our little lid here, but that probably isn't the best way to seal. Now today we would, put this in a glass
hot
jar,
bath
or a
and-
hot bath, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
What is her description here?
Mary Randolph does have a solution for this, and you're right, the lid is lovely, but that's not what she
Yeah.
recommends. She actually tells you that once you've put your preserves into your receptacle, put letter paper wet with brandy on the preserves and cover the tops with many folds of soft paper that will tie around closely.
So what she's doing is cutting a piece of paper the size of this on the inside. She's brandying it and laying that on. Now, that's sort of similar to the idea of, pouring like paraffin on the top. Or,
Exactly, it's creating a seal with something
Right.
that's antiseptic.
Right.
So in Amelia Simmons' recipe, that wasn't necessary because they're just covered
They
in
are
brandy.
brandy, yeah. Can't go wrong there.
Well, and now we see Amelia Simmons used a little sugar, lots of brandy. Now we're using lots of sugar and a little bit of brandy just to
Right.
provide that seal.
Right, and so we would put that little brandy paper on there, let that sort of seal the air from the top, and then we would put this lid on and then cover it with paper,
And tie it up,
around, right.
and then store it somewhere that's dry and safe.
Cool and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So now it's time to try this one. This one you made earlier, right?
Yes, these are some preserves we did before.
Okay, so what have we got here? You got one of the seeds right up on
We
top.
do actually, yes. Our last batch, we were able to get a few of these actual
I'll try
seeds
that
out
last.
of the pit. All right.
Try that last.
And she just did, Mary Randolph included that as a sort of extra, hey, if you want to, you could include this.
Right, and I've never really heard about seeds stored in sugar syrup before, so that I
Waste
thought that
not,
was
want
interesting.
not. There's another
Okay,
one.
look at that.
Here we go. All right, John,
Okay,
you are the judge
I
here.
gotta test it. And
Let's see who can
let's find
gets
out.
better bragging rights.
Well, that is a lot like
Yeah.
What you're gonna find at the store today, let me go back and try one of these again. They're completely different animals. Just day and night difference.
So I wonder if maybe John's bragging actually spoke to changing tastes.
Changing tastes, or again now, but we're just trying them out of the jar.
That's true.
Now they may have eaten them just out of the jar, but you could also, I think these might work better in a pie than those, I don't know.
Though those are almost practically, you wouldn't have to cook that very much, especially after it sat there longer.
Right, and we definitely have something going on here between these 18th century, and this is a typical 18th century style of preservation, and then this is happening in this 19th century time period, and there's a good reason for that, I believe. Probably sugar becomes a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
Possibly brandy gets more expensive. It's hard to say.
So who won?
I don't know. I mean, if they're two different monsters completely.
Yeah.
This is what you would get today if you opened up a can of peaches. Those are good. Those are great. These are something different.
And I think we see it morphing here more into the kinds of foods that we're used to today.
Right.
So I wonder if John's bragging was partly just based on his being part of a different generation than his mother.
All right. I think if I wanted to serve something different to people, and I wanted to say, you know, 18th century cooking, it's the same, but it's different.
Yeah.
This would be the thing I would choose to show them as an example of that,
Right.
rather than, hey, this is the birth of the modern preserved peach that we're used
Absolutely. And I think today we might come at something like this as a special dessert rather than a method of preservation. You know, I know I've been at dinner at people's houses where they say, oh, let's take some fresh peaches and pour brandy on it. It's just a very different mentality.
And light it on fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Ivy.
Have I told you today how much I love chocolate?
Twice now, Ivy. But tell me again.
I could live on chocolate.
Really?
I love chocolate to the moon and back.
So I'll bet you're wanting to make something chocolate today.
Can we?
Yes, I've got a great recipe. How about a chocolate tart?
Damn.
This recipe is from the 1800 edition of Hannah Glass's cookbook, The Complete Confectioner.
Let's get started.
We're gonna start by mixing 4 large egg yolks. To that, we're going to add about a tablespoon of rice flour. We're going to need about a tablespoon of milk. There we go. And we also need a pinch of salt. Here's some salt. There we are. And now we're going to whisk this up. I'll get it started and then I'll let you whisk it, okay? Get it good and mixed. Okay, here you go. You can whisk it. When this is whisked up nice and smooth, we're gonna set this bowl aside and work on our next step. In our next step, we have a pint of cream, which is brought to a simmer, and I'm adding to that 5 ounces of the grated chocolate.
Chocolate.
I'm also gonna add 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now we can add a little bit of our chocolate mix here to our egg mixture.
Why just a little bit?
Well, we don't want to cook our eggs, so we're going to temper them by adding just a small amount first. Once the eggs have come up to temperature, then we can add this mixture back in to all the rest of our chocolate. So now let's take our mixture here and we're going to pour it in. There we are.
Yum, yum.
Now we're going to take this back,
put it over the fire, keep stirring it, and it should thicken right up, right away. Once this starts boiling, it'll only take a minute or two to thicken. Okay, where's that pie crust we prepared earlier? Here, I'm gonna hold the pan. Can you get more of that out for me? Here, take the whisk. There, help me get more of that out. Get all the way up in there.
Right over there.
We need a spoon.
We do. There's a spoon.
Let me get the last little bit out. Here, take the whisk. Thank you.
All it needs to do is I don't know.
There we are. Let's spread this out nice and even. This recipe makes the perfect amount for our handmade tart tin.
Is it ready to eat yet?
Not quite yet. We're going to need to bake it first. We're going to bake this for about 45 minutes, and if you're baking it in a modern oven, set it to 350 degrees.
Now is it ready?
Not quite yet. Our final little step here is to sprinkle some sugar on and caramelize it with the salamander, which is a very common way of finishing off a dessert in the 18th century.
A salamander? You mean the amphibious kind?
No, salamanders in the 18th century are a special heated iron that we use to do the caramelization. So let's sprinkle some sugar on top. I gotta do more than that, like this.
Okay.
Like that. Now let's take the salamander to it. Now this pie is meant to be served completely cold. This should set even after it's cold for a good 3 or 4 hours, so it completely solidifies and yeah, I know. Maybe we should try just a little piece right now. Okay, we'll take a little tiny piece here, even though it's not completely cold yet. Let's give it a try. Bring the plate over. Hurry! Ugh. There, let's give it a little try here. I'll let you have that little end piece. Here we go. There we go. Give that a try. That turned out great. That's a little chocolate pie or a chocolate tart. Isn't that wonderful? In our episode today, we're making a very tasty lemon cream. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. So I'm here with Michael Dragoo today, and we're going to be doing this this recipe. What's this recipe from?
This is from the 1796 Amelia Simmons American Cookery.
Right. It's one of the cookbooks we offer that's in a facsimile sort of format, so you can take it to an event. It's just like the cookbook would have been in the day. What are our ingredients we need for this?
We've got 6 egg whites and 1 whole egg,
Okay.
including the yolk. And we've got the juice of 4 lemons. And we've got a cup of water and 2 cups of sugar. And then we are going to strain that concoction before we put it over the fire.
This will get all the treadles out of the eggs, so it's a nice smooth mixture.
And one final thing, I'm going to add the rind, 1 whole lemon.
That's all we need to do. Let's put this over a medium to low heat. While this is on the fire, you need to constantly stir this so it doesn't burn. Gently heat this until just before boiling, and it will start to change texture, and that's when you need to take it off. While this is cooking, you'll want to scum off the top occasionally to get rid of the foam that develops at the top.
Here we go.
It thickened right up. Just before boiling or right at boiling, it really changes consistency and gets nice and thick. The recipe says to serve it in china bowls. So these are just perfect for this. These little bowls are new to the catalog this year.
You can serve this up either hot or let it cool down and have it cool. It's good either way.
We need our little tester. Come on in, Ivy. I've got a couple that are cooled that we made earlier so that we can try these out. You go ahead and try one of those. I'm gonna try a warm one. Whoa. Ooh. Those are really, really good. It's like a perfect lemonade.
Lemon drop. Those are hot lemon drops.
But in a thick version for the table. And this would be, boy, this kind of filling in a tart would be extraordinary. This is like a lemon cream pie. Very, very wonderful. Either cool or warm.
You know what would be good if we tried to put this in some of those donuts?
Well, bring in a donut.
Oh,
here.
Yeah,
These are donuts we made last episode. Here we go. So let's try this out.
Yep.
Lemon cream plus the donut. Maybe we need a little whipped cream on top. Some of that glaze, that sugar glaze.
This is great too.
It doesn't get any better.
No? No. Oh man, this is the gift that keeps on
Good
giving.
start a donut shop. If you get a chance to make this lemon cream, I guarantee you'll love it. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend. It's a beautiful fall day outside. It is harvest time. And for us, it's time for Thanksgiving. So we've got a beautiful 18th century recipe for Thanksgiving. You're gonna love this pumpkin pie. Thanks for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. The recipe today comes from American Cookery by Amelia Simmons. This is 18th century. This is 1797. And Amelia Simmons has, in this particular cookbook, has an amazing number of Thanksgiving Day recipes. She doesn't call them out for that, but if you want roast turkey recipe, it's in here. If you want a pumpkin pie, yep, you want cranberry sauce, it's in here. It's a wonderful cookbook for this time of year, and it's American cookery. It's the first cookbook printed in America with American recipes, American ingredients. So, perfect for this time of year. There are a couple of pumpkin pie recipes in here. Actually, they're called pumpkin puddings, but they're pumpkin pies. There's a squash pudding in here, so there's multiple ones. We're gonna go with pumpkin pie number 2. This one is, the recipe's almost too quick to read. Number 2, 1 quart of milk, 1 pint of pumpkin, 4 eggs, molasses, allspice, ginger, in a crust, bake 1 hour. That's it. That's all there is to it. It couldn't be any easier than that, right? So there are some assumptions in here. If we go back and look at recipe number 1, we find out that the pumpkin is stewed and strained. Now, I did not stew and strain my pumpkin for today's recipe. It works out so much better if you bake the pumpkin instead. If you put it on a baking sheet, bake it for until it's nice and soft. Then it doesn't add a whole bunch of water to the pumpkin, and it makes it just super easy. We can just peel the skin right off of this and then take the internals and mush them up and push them through a strainer, and we get a nice, wonderful pumpkin pulp out of this. Really, really easy to do if you've got a nice small pumpkin, but the pumpkin pulp is very easy to get from the store also, so you can do it either way. Super easy to make. all our ingredients are ready, we can start to mix the internals of our pie together. I'm gonna start off with our pumpkin. Now, she called for a pint of pumpkin. That's enough. This whole recipe is enough to make 2 normal pies. We're only gonna make 1 pie, so I'm gonna cut this in half. So we need about a cup of pumpkin pulp here. And there, that is exactly a cup of pumpkin pulp. So milk is the next ingredient. The recipe calls for a quart, so we're gonna put in a pint of milk, and I would make it whole milk if I were you. Next up, 2 eggs, and we're just going to whip these up a little bit first before we toss them in. There we go, our 2 eggs. And that's really all the sort of main ingredients we have here. Now we have spices, and it calls for ginger. Now, of course, there's no amounts. It's all about how rich we want this pie. This is the second pie. The first one had a lot more spices in it. So you can almost kind of judge by what's going on here that there's an inexpensive pie and an expensive pie. So we're doing the inexpensive one, as it were. We're gonna use a good bit of ginger though. It's one of the least expensive spices. And then allspice also, again, one of the lesser expensive spices in our time period. And we're gonna go whole hog here and just put a whole bunch in there. I really wanted to do recipe number 1 because it had nutmeg in it. We're just gonna cheat and we're gonna put nutmeg in this one anyway. As long as you don't tell anybody, it'll be all right. So all the ingredients so far have been just very, very typical in your standard pumpkin pie recipe of today. Maybe molasses isn't something that you've normally put in a pumpkin pie, but that's in this recipe. And we don't have an amount. It's how kind of sweet we want it to be and how much molasses flavor we want to come in here. I'm gonna go with about 1.5 teaspoons. Just a little, there we go. 1.5 teaspoons of molasses. And that should give us a little bit of sweetness, not too much. And let's get this really mixed well. Molasses is also gonna help us out with that color. It's gonna give us a nice, rich brown color on our pumpkin pie, not, sort of a sickly green yellow color. We don't want that. Now it's time for our pie crust. Now I've already prepared some pie crust dough here from Amelia Simmons' cookbook. She's got 5 or 6, even I think 7 recipes for different kinds of pie crust. Today, usually we just have, one kind of pie crust. This one has some egg in it, which is not what I usually put in a pie crust, but this will be fun. Let's get this worked out here. I think it's really interesting that she's got multiple kinds of pie crusts. Some of them are for different kinds of dishes, and other ones seem to be maybe a pie crust for a beginner, so it's a simpler way to do it, right? So there's multiple reasons why there's 7 different kinds of pie crust in here. Maybe there are also richer ones, ones that use more expensive ingredients, and then simpler ones. So maybe you don't have all the ingredients for one kind of pie crust and you'll try another one, although they're all very similar. I like pie crust, so I'm gonna make this one kind of thick for our pie. So the filling was sitting there while I was working on the pie crust, and it can kind of want to settle. So make sure to give it a stir before you fill up your pie crust. But our pie crust is all set in our pan. It's got its little crimping all the way around because you want it to look nice. And we've stirred up our filling, so now we can pour it into our pie crust. Our pie is all assembled and ready to go into the oven. Our oven's already fired up, but if you're gonna do this in a modern kitchen, in a modern oven, probably 350 degrees for 45 minutes to an hour or so. You'll start to see, the crust brown up and the custard start to set up. It's not gonna completely set up in the oven. That happens when it comes out and starts to cool, but it should start to at least look like it's setting up. So let's get this one in the oven so we can try it out. Well, our pumpkin pie turned out. It's sliced up very, very nicely. It's still slightly warm, and yet it's still held together exactly like it should have. If we let it cool off, which I didn't want to wait, it would have sliced up even better. Got a wonderful color, smells tremendous, and hopefully the taste is the same on this guy. Nice little custardy consistency on the inside. I think I made the right call with the amount of spices. It's got some nice spiciness to it. Probably not as sweet as you might be used to on a pumpkin pie. Since the sweetener is just the molasses, I didn't put a whole lot in there, because if I did, it'd bring in a whole lot of molasses flavor that maybe I don't want. So it's not too sweet. Normally, I like mine with a lot of, fluffy whipped cream on the top of that, and that can help that. I think it's got a tremendous flavor to it, and the crust turned out great too. I think that's a 10. It's a really good pumpkin pie. Really happy with how that one turned out. This would make, and it's got a, sometimes you get pumpkin pies that have too thick of a consistency, like too hard. This one is light and fluffy, even though it doesn't have some of those things that you would expect to make a pumpkin pie light and fluffy. This one really, really, really good. I really like it. So this recipe did not call for the nutmeg, but we put some in anyway, and that definitely was the right call. Could have probably even put in more, because that's really the best part of a pumpkin pie. So don't miss out on the nutmeg in your pumpkin pie. This one is definitely an 18th century pumpkin pie. 1797, Amelia Simmons. She did a tremendous job of giving us a pumpkin pie recipe that we could put in our Thanksgiving Day meal. So hopefully for your Thanksgiving Day meal, you can have one just like this. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming along. We try out all kinds of different things, and sometimes they work out, and sometimes maybe not so much. Usually though, they're definitely worth the experiment, and boy, this one is good.